Here's something that might sound strange. Darwin Watterson, the little orange goldfish who grew legs because he missed his brother, might be the most psychologically complex character on Cartoon Network. And I'm not being cute about that. I'm not exaggerating for effect. I genuinely think that if you sat a child psychologist down and showed them this character's arc across 6 seasons, and 240 episodes, they'd start scribbling notes and wouldn't stop for hours. Because Darwin isn't just a funny sidekick. He isn't just the cheerful best friend who exists to bounce off the main character. Darwin Watterson is a walking, talking case study in attachment theory, identity formation, adopted child psychology, codependency, moral development, and the quiet devastation of a person who will reshape his entire body, his entire biology, rather than be separated from the people he loves. And nobody talks about this. People talk about Gumball's sarcasm, Nicole's rage, Richard's cosmic stupidity, but Darwin just kind of sits there, smiling, being nice, being positive, being the emotional backbone of the entire Watterson family, while everyone around him takes him for granted. And that, right there, is maybe the most psychologically realistic thing about him. Tonight, we're going to do something a little different on Cartoon. We're going to look at Darwin Watterson through the lens of actual psychology. Not pop psychology, not internet personality quizzes, but the real frameworks that psychologists use to understand human behavior. Attachment theory, Bowlby's work on separation anxiety, Erikson's stages of identity development, Kohlberg's moral reasoning theory, the psychology of adoption and transracial identity, codependency models, and the fascinating phenomenon of what therapists call people-pleasing as a survival strategy. We're going to apply all of this to a cartoon goldfish with legs and green shoes, and I promise you, it's going to make you see this character and this show in an entirely new light. If you're new to the channel, welcome. Cartoon is where we go deep on animated series, the kind of deep that keeps you up at night thinking about cartoon characters. If you enjoy this, subscribe and stick around, because we have a lot more of this coming. And if you're a returning viewer, get comfortable. You know how we do this. Pull the covers up, turn the lights down. It's going to be a long one. Let's start at the beginning. And for Darwin, the beginning is more traumatic than most people realize. The Origins is a 2-part episode from season 4 of The Amazing World of Gumball, episodes 20 and 21 to be specific. It aired on February 15th, 2016, and it tells the story of how Darwin came to be part of the Watterson family. And when I say this episode is foundational to understanding Darwin's psychology, I mean it in the way that a therapist means formative childhood experience. Everything Darwin is, everything he does, every weird quirk and hidden fear and desperate act of loyalty, it all traces back to what happens in these 22 minutes. Here's the setup. Nicole and Richard Watterson are young parents. Their son, Gumball, is a hyperactive 4-year-old who is destroying their home and their sanity. They can't keep up with him. They're exhausted. They need something, anything, to keep this kid occupied. So they buy him a pet goldfish, and they name it Darwin, and it dies almost immediately. Richard, through a combination of stupidity and bad luck, kills the fish. So they buy another one, and name it Darwin, and it dies. They buy another Darwin, dead. Another Darwin, dead. Richard sings Swing Low, Sweet Chariot each time he flushes the little corpse down the toilet and heads back to the pet store for the next replacement. It's played for dark comedy, and it is genuinely funny. But think about what this establishes. Before our Darwin, the Darwin we know and love, even enters the picture, the name Darwin is already associated with death, replaceability, and disposability. The Wattersons have treated the name as a label for a rotating cast of identical, interchangeable fish. They're not pets with individual identities. They're products. When one breaks, you get another one. This is the legacy that Darwin inherits. He's Darwin well, depending on which source you consult, he's somewhere between the 3rd and the 8th replacement. His very name carries the weight of every predecessor who was flushed without ceremony. Now, a psychologist would immediately flag this as significant. In adoption psychology, there's a concept called the replacement child, a child who is adopted or born specifically to fill the void left by a previous loss. Replacement children often struggle with identity because they carry the unconscious expectation of being someone else. They're not valued for who they are. They're valued for the role they fill. And Darwin, named after a sequence of dead fish, purchased from a mysterious van as a commodity, literally enters the Watterson family as a replacement product. But here's where it gets interesting. Our Darwin is different. The mysterious shopkeeper who sells him to Richard warns that this fish is very special and more than he seems, and he's right. This Darwin has something the others didn't. He has the capacity for connection. He bonds with Gumball in a way that transcends the pet-owner relationship. They play together. They communicate in their own way. There's a genuine attachment forming between a 4-year-old boy and his goldfish. And then Richard accidentally flushes Darwin down the toilet. This is where the Origins Part 2 picks up, and this is where the psychology gets really intense. Darwin is flushed into the sewer system and out into the ocean. He's alone. He's terrified. He's been forcibly separated from the only person who ever treated him as more than a disposable product. And what does he do? He grows legs. I need to sit with that for a second, because the show plays it as a magical, heartwarming moment. And it is heartwarming, but it's also psychologically extraordinary. Darwin's body literally transforms in response to separation anxiety. He develops lungs so he can breathe on land. He grows legs so he can walk back to Gumball. His biology reshapes itself around a single imperative: get back to the person I'm attached to. Get back to my family. In John Bowlby's attachment theory, which is arguably the most influential framework in developmental psychology, the attachment bond between a child and their primary caregiver is described as a survival mechanism. Infants are biologically programmed to seek proximity to their caregivers because, in evolutionary terms, separation from the caregiver means death. When that proximity is threatened, the child enters a state of protest, crying, searching, becoming increasingly distressed. If the separation continues, the child moves to despair, withdrawal, sadness, a kind of giving up. And if the separation is permanent, the child may enter detachment, an emotional shutdown that looks like coping, but is actually a defense mechanism against unbearable pain. Darwin's journey in the Origins Part 2 maps perfectly onto the protest phase of Bowlby's separation anxiety model. He's desperate. He's searching. He crosses deserts and mountains. He gets captured by animal control. He escapes. He keeps going. The show gives him a song, "I'm on my way." That's essentially a musical expression of protest phase attachment seeking. He's saying, in the simplest terms possible, I will not be separated from you. I will change my own body if that's what it takes. I will become something I wasn't before, a walking, breathing, land-dwelling creature, because the alternative is to be apart from the person I love. And here's the part that actually makes me tear up every time. When Darwin finally reaches the Elmore Mall and catches up to his family, he sees them shopping for a new fish, a replacement, another Darwin. The family is already moving on. They loved him, but they're preparing to replace him, just like they replaced all the others. Darwin watches this happen. He sees himself being replaced, and he walks away. This is the despair phase. The protest has failed. The attachment figure is choosing someone else. And Darwin, heartbroken, turns away. He starts to give up, but then Gumball senses him. Gumball, in the pet store, about to buy a new fish, suddenly stops. He feels Darwin's presence, and he runs, and they find each other, and they reunite in slow motion, a heart exploding behind them, in what is simultaneously the most ridiculous and most emotionally devastating scene in the show's history. The Wattersons officially adopt Darwin. Gumball gives him his green shoes. They fall asleep in the car together. And from this moment forward, Darwin is a Watterson. Not a pet, not a replacement, a son, a brother. But here's what a psychologist would tell you. The trauma doesn't go away just because the story has a happy ending. Darwin's early experiences, being one of many disposable fish, being accidentally flushed, watching his family prepare to replace him, these experiences are encoded in his nervous system. They shape his attachment style, his relationship patterns, his deepest fears, and most fundamental behaviors. And the show, to its enormous credit, demonstrates this across the entire series. Let me give you the clinical framework, and then I'll show you how Darwin's behavior across 6 seasons maps onto it almost perfectly. In attachment theory, there are 4 primary attachment styles that develop in childhood based on the quality of caregiving. Secure attachment develops when the caregiver is consistently responsive and available. The child learns that their needs will be met and that they can explore the world safely because their caregiver is a reliable base. Anxious preoccupied attachment develops when the caregiver is inconsistently available, sometimes responsive, sometimes not, leaving the child in a state of chronic uncertainty about whether their needs will be met. Dismissive avoidant attachment develops when the caregiver is consistently unavailable or rejecting. The child learns to suppress their attachment needs and becomes self-reliant. And fearful avoidant attachment develops in cases of abuse or severe neglect. The child both craves craves and fears closeness. Darwin displays textbook anxious, preoccupied attachment. He's excessively attuned to the emotional states of those around him. He's a people pleaser who prioritizes others' happiness over his own. He's terrified of abandonment. He's possessive of his closest relationships. He has difficulty setting boundaries. He suppresses his own negative emotions until they explode. And he defines his identity almost entirely through his relationships, rather than through any independent sense of self. Let me walk through these one by one, because the evidence across the series is overwhelming. People-pleasing. Darwin's default mode is to make other people happy. The Gumball Wiki describes him as someone who desires to see others happy, and whose selfless acts of happiness can be seen in episodes such as The Fan, The Advice, and The Stories. In each of these episodes, Darwin goes out of his way to cheer up someone who is sad, often at significant personal cost. He doesn't do this because he's asked to. He does it compulsively, automatically, as if other people's unhappiness is an emergency that he must respond to immediately. In psychology, this pattern is called fawning. It's the fourth trauma response, alongside fight, flight, and freeze. Fawning is a survival strategy developed by children who learn that keeping other people happy is the best way to maintain the attachment relationship and avoid abandonment. If I'm useful, if I'm pleasant, if I'm making you smile, you won't throw me away. You won't flush me down the toilet. You won't replace me with another fish. Darwin's people-pleasing isn't personality. It's survival, fear of abandonment. This one is explicit in the show. In The Burden, it's directly stated that Darwin is possessive and fears being lonely. In The Roots, when the family attempts to reconnect him with his fish roots by releasing him into a pond, Darwin is devastated, not just by being abandoned, but by the family's subsequent trip to an ice cream shop. The juxtaposition of their grief with their ability to move on and get dessert is genuinely gutting if you read it through an attachment lens. They're sad, but they're coping. They're replacing the feeling. And Darwin has seen this before. He's seen the family replace a dead fish and carry on. The fact that they can function without him, that his absence is survivable for them, is his deepest fear confirmed. The twist of the episode, that Darwin was actually trying to guilt-trip Nicole into buying him a bigger tank, not mourning his lost heritage, is played for comedy, and it is funny. But it also reveals something important. Darwin has learned to manipulate through emotional display. He's figured out that looking sad gets him things. That vulnerability is a tool. This is a classic pattern in anxiously attached children. They amplify their emotional displays to ensure that the caregiver pays attention, because they can't trust that the caregiver will pay attention on their own. The Bros is the most psychologically rich Darwin episode in the series, and I don't think people appreciate just how deep it goes. The premise is that Gumball and Penny have started dating, as of the shell, and Darwin can't handle it. He's jealous. He's threatened. He's afraid that Penny is going to take Gumball away from him, and his response to this fear is to try to sabotage the relationship. A child psychologist would immediately recognize what's happening here. Darwin is experiencing what's called triangulation anxiety, the distress that occurs when a third party enters a primary attachment relationship. For Darwin, Gumball isn't just a brother. He's an attachment figure. He's the person Darwin transformed his body to reunite with. He's the person whose love literally caused Darwin to evolve. The attachment bond between them isn't just strong, it's constitutive. Darwin's entire identity is built around being Gumball's brother. And when Penny enters the picture, that identity feels threatened. The Bros plays this as comedy, but the underlying emotions are real and recognizable. Darwin's jealousy isn't petty, it's existential. If Gumball doesn't need him anymore, if Gumball has Penny now, then who is Darwin? What is he for? The episode taps into a fundamental anxiety that many adopted children experience. The fear that the bond with the adoptive family is conditional, and that a real relationship, in this case, a romantic one, will always take priority over an adoptive one. And the show never fully resolves this anxiety, which is actually the most realistic thing about it. Darwin learns to accept Gumball's relationship with Penny, but the underlying fear doesn't disappear. It resurfaces in different forms across multiple episodes, because that's how attachment anxiety works. It doesn't go away just because you understand it intellectually. It lives in the body. It lives in the nervous system. It shows up in moments of stress and change, regardless of how many times you've told yourself that everything is fine. Let me take a tangent here, because I want to talk about something that I think is genuinely brilliant about the way Gumball handles Darwin's adoption narrative. The show explicitly parallels Darwin's experience with the the experience of transracial and transcultural adoptees. This isn't my interpretation. It's confirmed by Cartoon Network themselves, who have included Darwin in their Black History Month, Juneteenth, and Kwanzaa social media campaigns. When the show draws Darwin's human form in other animation styles, he's consistently depicted as black. And Ben Bachelet has confirmed that Darwin is meant to represent the experience of being different from your adoptive family. The Roots is the most direct exploration of this parallel. The Wattersons try to reconnect Darwin with his fish heritage by eating worms, wearing ocean-themed outfits, and playing whale sounds. The satire of well-meaning but clumsy cultural appropriation is sharp. The family is doing what they think is right, honoring Darwin's culture, but they're doing it in a way that's performative and ultimately based on assumptions rather than genuine understanding. They're projecting what they think a fish should want onto Darwin without asking him what he actually wants. This mirrors a very real phenomenon in transracial adoption, where adoptive parents may attempt to connect their child with their birth culture in ways that are well-intentioned but superficial, taking them to cultural events they've never expressed interest in, cooking food from their country, decorating their room with their cultural motifs. The desire comes from a good place, but it can actually reinforce the child's sense of being different, of being other, of being a project to be managed, rather than a person to be known. Darwin's response to all of this is telling. He doesn't want to go back to his roots. He doesn't feel a connection to fish culture. He's a Watterson. His identity isn't defined by his biology. It's defined by his relationships, his choices, his experiences. And when the family's misguided attempt at cultural reconnection leads them to literally release him into a pond, his fury is entirely justified. They assumed they knew what he needed based on what he is, not who he is. They treated his species as his identity. A psychologist working with adopted families would recognize this dynamic immediately. It's one of the most common and most painful challenges in adoption: the tension between honoring a child's origins and recognizing that their identity is their own to construct. Darwin has the right to explore his fish heritage if and when he chooses to, but that exploration has to be on his term, not his family. The family's job is to be present, to be supportive, and to let Darwin lead. Instead, they tried to lead for him, and the result was abandonment dressed up as empowerment. Let me move on to another dimension of Darwin's psychology that I find endlessly fascinating: his moral development. If you've taken a psychology class, you've probably encountered Lawrence Kohlberg's stages of moral development. Kohlberg proposed that moral reasoning progresses through 6 stages, grouped into 3 levels. The pre-conventional level is about self-interest. You follow rules to avoid punishment or to gain rewards. The conventional level is about social conformity. You follow rules because society expects you to, and you derive your sense of right and wrong from the approval of others. The post-conventional level is about principled morality. You follow rules because you've developed an internal ethical framework based on universal principles, and you're willing to break social conventions when they conflict with those principles. Darwin operates primarily at the conventional level, but he shows fascinating movement between levels depending on the situation. In most episodes, his moral reasoning is driven by a desire for social approval and a compulsive need to be seen as good. He follows rules because rules are what good people follow. He tells the truth because good people tell the truth. He helps others because good people help others. This isn't cynical. Darwin genuinely believes in being good, but the motivation is often rooted in identity rather than principle. He wants to be good because being good is who he is. It's how he maintains his place in the family, in the social group, in the world. This becomes visible in episodes where Darwin's moral certainty is challenged. The safety is the clearest example. Darwin becomes obsessed with internet safety and starts monitoring and controlling his family's behavior. He installs surveillance, he censors content, he restricts freedom, all in the name of safety. He's moved from conventional morality, following rules because they're the rules, to a kind of authoritarian morality, enforcing rules because he's decided he knows best. And the show recognizes this as a problem. Darwin's desire to protect has become a desire to control, and the line between the two is thinner than he realizes. A therapist would see the safety as a manifestation of Darwin's attachment anxiety, expressed through moral rigidity. He can't control whether people will leave him, but he can control whether people are safe. And if everyone is safe, if he's the one keeping them safe, then he's indispensable. He's needed. He can't be abandoned if he's the guardian. Contrast this with The Words, an episode that reveals a very different side of Darwin's moral development. In this episode, it's revealed that Darwin has been suppressing his negative opinions about everyone around him. He's been bottling up every frustrated thought, every critical observation, every moment of genuine disagreement, because expressing negativity is not nice. And Darwin's identity is built on being nice. When Gumball encourages him to speak his mind, the dam breaks. Darwin becomes brutally honest, viciously so. He tears apart his classmates' insecurities, says terrible things, and temporarily becomes the meanest person in Elmore. This is a classic pattern in what psychologists call the suppressed shadow. The Jungian concept of the shadow refers to the parts of the self that we repress because they don't fit our conscious self-image. Darwin's shadow is anger, criticism, judgment, meanness. These aren't foreign to him. They're parts of him that he's been ruthlessly suppressing because they threaten his identity as the nice one. And when they finally emerge, they emerge violently because suppression doesn't eliminate emotions. It pressurizes them. The episode is comedically extreme, but the psychological reality is accurate. People who define themselves through niceness are often sitting on enormous reserves of anger. The nicer the persona, the bigger the shadow. And when the persona cracks, when the suppression fails, the anger that comes out is disproportionate to whatever triggered it, because it's not just about the current situation. It's about every situation that was swallowed, every feeling that was denied, every time they said, "It's fine," when it wasn't fine. Darwin's journey in The Words ends with him finding a middle ground, learning to express his feelings honestly, but not cruelly. But the show acknowledges that this balance is hard for him, and that his default setting is still suppression. This is realistic. Changing deeply ingrained emotional patterns takes time and consistent effort. And for someone with Darwin's attachment history, the fear that honesty will lead to rejection is always lurking in the background. Now, I want to talk about something that I think is the most psychologically profound aspect of Darwin's character, his relationship with identity. Who is Darwin Watterson? Not what is he. We know what he is. He's a goldfish who grew legs. But who is he? What defines him as a person? What are his interests, his ambition, his dreams, his fears, independent of his relationships? And here's the thing that's both heartbreaking and fascinating. The show struggles to answer this question because Darwin struggles to answer this question. Darwin's identity is almost entirely relational. He is Gumball's brother. He is Nicole and Richard's adopted son. He is Carrie's boyfriend. He is the moral compass of his friend group. Every role he occupies is defined by his relationship to someone else. Strip away those relationships, and what's left? The show hints at individual interests. Darwin likes Mexican food. He's good at swimming, obviously. He plays the ukulele. He enjoys synchronized swimming. But these are hobbies, not an identity. Compare Darwin to Gumball, whose personality is vivid and independent. Gumball is sarcastic, dramatic, lazy, creative, and intensely himself, regardless of who he's with. Or compare Darwin to Aeneas, whose intelligence and ambition define her independently of her family. Darwin doesn't have that kind of autonomous selfhood. He's defined by his connections. In developmental psychology, this is described through Erik Erikson's concept of identity formation. Erikson proposed that the central task of adolescence is developing a coherent sense of identity, answering the question, who am I? This involves exploring different roles, values, and beliefs, and eventually committing to a set of values and goals that feel authentically your own. Darwin's identity development is stalled in what Erikson would call identity foreclosure. He's committed to an identity, the loyal, good, happy brother, without genuinely exploring alternatives. He adopted the first identity that kept him safe, the grateful, pleasant adoptee who never complains, and locked it in. He never went through the exploration phase that healthy identity development requires, because exploration felt too dangerous. What if he explored and found something that the Wattersons didn't like? What if he became someone they couldn't love? Better to stay as he is, pleasant, agreeable, unthreatening, and never risk the relationship. This is stunningly realistic for an adopted character, and I want to take a moment to appreciate how well the show handles it. Many adopted children experience exactly this pattern. They develop an identity that they think their adoptive family wants, suppress the parts of themselves that might be too much or too different, and sacrifice authentic self-development for the security of belonging. The psychological cost is enormous because the belonging they achieve isn't based on their true self. It's based on a performance, and somewhere underneath the performance, the real person is waiting to be seen. Darwin's moments of genuine individuality are some of the most interesting scenes in the show. When he loses his temper in The Words, when he becomes possessive in The Bros, when he stands up to authority in The Safety, when he reveals his crush on Carrie. These are moments when the real Darwin, the Darwin beneath the performance, briefly surfaces. And what's fascinating is that these moments are almost always framed as Darwin acting out of character. The show itself and the other characters within it treat Darwin's genuine emotions as aberration rather than authentic expression. That's not like Darwin, they say. And and Darwin himself seems to agree. He treats his own anger, jealousy, and desire as problems to be fixed rather than feelings to be understood. A therapist would gently push back on this. They'd say, those feelings aren't not like you, they are you. The question isn't why you're feeling them. The question is why you've been so afraid to feel them. Let me now talk about Darwin's relationship with Gumball in more clinical terms, because I think it illustrates a pattern that psychologists would find both touching and concerning. Gumball and Darwin's bond is the emotional core of the entire show. It's the relationship around which everything else orbits, and it's beautiful, genuinely, sincerely beautiful. They love each other deeply. They do anything for each other. They share a bedroom, share adventures, share a life. Gumball gave Darwin his shoes when he first grew legs. Darwin literally evolved to be with Gumball. These are brothers in the most profound sense of the word, and the show never lets you forget it. But a psychologist looking at this relationship would also notice patterns of codependency. Codependency is a relational pattern in which one person's identity and emotional well-being become excessively dependent on another person. The codependent partner typically takes on a caretaking role, defines themselves through the relationship, has difficulty functioning independently, and experiences intense anxiety when the relationship is threatened. Darwin checks almost every box. He defines himself through his relationship with Gumball. He has difficulty functioning independently. Episodes where they're separated typically show Darwin struggling significantly more than Gumball. He experiences intense anxiety when the relationship is threatened, the bros being the clearest example. And his caretaking of Gumball, while generous and loving, also serves the function of making himself indispensable. Now, I want to be careful here, because codependency is a clinical term, and I'm applying it to a cartoon character. The show isn't depicting a pathological relationship. Gumball and Darwin's bond is, in the context of the show, healthy and functional. But the patterns are there, and they're worth examining because they illuminate something important about Darwin's inner world. Darwin's codependency with Gumball is, I believe, a direct consequence of his attachment history. He was a replacement fish who transformed his body to avoid being separated from his owner. He entered the family as a product and earned his place as a person through the intensity of his devotion. The lesson Darwin learned from his origin story is, love must be total. Love must be demonstrated constantly. And the moment you stop demonstrating it, you might be replaced. This is why Darwin's people-pleasing isn't just directed at Gumball. It's directed at everyone. He's generalized the lesson. Every relationship is a potential attachment that must be maintained through constant, exhausting emotional labor. Every person is a potential abandoner who might flush him if he doesn't perform his role correctly. Here's the thing that really gets me though. Gumball doesn't treat Darwin this way. Gumball takes Darwin for granted sometimes. Sure, he can be selfish, he can be thoughtless, but he never threatens the relationship. He never makes Darwin earn his place. He never holds the specter of replacement over Darwin's head. Gumball's love for Darwin is secure, stable, and unconditional. The problem isn't that Gumball is a bad attachment figure. The problem is that Darwin's early experiences have made it impossible for him to trust that any attachment is truly unconditional, no matter how many times Gumball demonstrates his love. Darwin's anxious attachment system whispers, but what if this time is different? What if this time he doesn't come back? That's the cruel irony of anxious attachment. The thing you're afraid of, abandonment, drives behaviors, clinginess, people-pleasing, possessiveness, that actually push people away. Darwin's attempts to prevent abandonment can sometimes be suffocating, and the show acknowledges this. In The Bros, Darwin's jealousy over Penny is portrayed as a problem, not as a reasonable concern. In The Burden, his possessiveness is shown to have negative consequences. The show understands that Darwin's fear is real, but it also understands that fear-driven behavior isn't always healthy, even when it comes from a place of genuine love. Let me shift gears now and talk about something that I think adds another layer to Darwin's psychology: his relationship with his own body. Darwin is a goldfish. He has a fish-shaped head, fins where his hands should be, a tail, and thanks to his miraculous transformation, legs. He exists in a world where the other members of his family are cats and rabbits. He's the only non-mammal in the household. He doesn't wear pants. He sleeps in a fishbowl rather than a bed, at least initially. He is, in the most literal sense, a different species from the people he considers his family. And the show uses this physical difference as a rich source of both comedy and psychological exploration. The Roots uses Darwin's fish biology as a metaphor for cultural difference. The genius reveals that Darwin is still legally registered as a pet, not a family member. The running gag of Darwin's feet being pixelated, as if there's something shameful, the same pixelation that's applied to Gumball's crotch, suggests that Darwin's body is inherently transgressive in a world designed for mammals. A psychologist specializing in body image and identity would find this fascinating. Darwin exists in a body that doesn't match his social environment. His family is one species. He's another. His world is designed for creatures with lungs and legs. He evolved those features artificially, through force of will. He's physically present in a world that wasn't built for him, and he has to constantly adapt, constantly perform, to fit in. This is an extraordinarily powerful metaphor for many real-world experiences. Transracial adoptees, who look physically different from their families. People with disabilities navigating able-bodied spaces. Gender non-conforming individuals in gendered environments. Immigrants in new cultural contexts. Darwin's physical difference from his family isn't just a visual gag. It's a lens through which the show explores the experience of being visibly, irreducibly different from the people you belong to. And Darwin handles this difference with characteristic grace and humor. He doesn't angst about being a fish in a family of mammals. He doesn't demand that the world accommodate his fishness. He adapts. He smiles. He puts on his shoes, the shoes Gumball gave him, the only clothing he wears, and he goes to school and lives his life as a Watterson. The adaptation looks effortless, but effortlessness in the face of fundamental difference is itself a kind of performance. And the moments when that performance slips, when Darwin is reminded of his fishness, when his body fails him, when the world treats him differently because of what he is, those moments reveal the emotional cost of constant adaptation. I want to talk about Darwin's relationship with Carrie Kruger now, because I think it's one of the most psychologically interesting romantic relationships in animated television. And I don't say that lightly. Carrie is a ghost. Literally, she's a white, translucent, ghostly figure with a tail instead of legs, and a fringe that always covers one eye. She's punk, she's dry, she's fascinated by darkness and horror, and she has limited ability to interact with the physical world. She can't eat, she can't feel physical sensation. She exists in a state of perpetual incorporeality. Darwin is a fish with legs who was brought to life by love. Carrie is a ghost who exists in a state of partial non-existence. They're both beings who inhabit the margins of reality, not fully one thing or another. And their relationship, which becomes official in The Matchmaker from season 5, is a beautiful exploration of what it means to love someone across fundamental differences. From a psychological perspective, what I find most interesting about the Darwin-Carrie relationship is how it challenges Darwin's people-pleasing patterns. Carrie doesn't need Darwin to be nice. She doesn't respond particularly well to niceness. She's too cool for that, too sardonic, too comfortable with darkness. What Carrie responds to is authenticity. She likes Darwin when he's being himself, genuinely himself, not the performing self that he presents to the world. In the drama, their relationship is described as near perfect, and part of what makes it work is that Darwin is considerate of Carrie's limitations in a way that feels genuine rather than performative. He lets her possess his body so she can experience physical sensation. He accommodates her ghostly nature without making a big deal of it. He treats her differences as features, not bugs. And Carrie, in return, offers Darwin something he rarely gets from anyone else: the freedom to not be performing. She doesn't need him to be happy all the time. She doesn't need him to be the moral compass. She just needs him to be Darwin. A psychologist would call this a corrective emotional experience, a relationship that challenges and gradually heals the patterns established by earlier attachment wounds. If Darwin's early experiences taught him that love is conditional on performance, his relationship with Carrie begins to teach him that love can exist without performance, that he can be imperfect, grumpy, confused, and still be loved, that his value isn't contingent on his usefulness. This is particularly significant given the adoption angle. One of the deepest wounds in adopted child psychology is the fear that love is transactional, that you must earn your place in the family through good behavior, and that authentic self-expression might cost you that place. Carrie's love for Darwin isn't transactional. She doesn't love him because he's useful or because he makes her feel good. She loves him because of who he is, including the parts of himself that he usually hides. Now, I want to take a bigger tangent and talk about something that connects Darwin's psychology to the broader themes of the show, because I think this is where the analysis gets really interesting. The Amazing World of Gumball is fundamentally a show about identity. Almost every major character arc in the series involves someone struggling with who they are versus who they're expected to be. Penny breaks out of her shell and has to figure out who she is without it. Rob escapes the void and has to construct an identity from scratch. Nicole battles between the person her parents wanted her to be and the person she actually is. Gumball discovers his real name is Zach and has to fight to reclaim his preferred identity. Darwin's identity struggle is the quietest and perhaps the deepest of all of them. It's the struggle of a person who has never had the luxury of an identity crisis, because the stakes of an identity crisis, potential rejection, potential abandonment, are too high. Darwin can't afford to ask, who am I? Because the answer might be someone the Wattersons don't want. And this is where the show's meta-narrative connects to Darwin's personal story in a way that I find absolutely brilliant. The show is aware that it's a show. The characters gradually become aware that they're fictional. And one of the implications of this awareness is that the characters' roles are assigned. They're written to be certain things. Gumball is the protagonist. Nicole is the angry mom. Richard is the dumb dad. Darwin is the loyal sidekick. But what if you don't want to be the loyal sidekick? What if the role you've been assigned doesn't capture the fullness of who you are? What if you have anger and jealousy and ambition and darkness and all the things that a loyal sidekick isn't supposed to have? This is Rob's dilemma, obviously, the background character who rebels against his assigned role. But it's also Darwin's dilemma, expressed more quietly and more subtly. Darwin doesn't rebel against his role. He accepts it. He performs it. He's the best loyal sidekick anyone could ask for. But the acceptance itself is a form of self-suppression. And the show, in its most perceptive moments, acknowledges that something is lost in the process. The words is the clearest expression of this. When Darwin finally speaks his mind, when he breaks out of the nice role, the world reacts with shock and horror. That's not you, everyone says. And Darwin eventually agrees. He goes back to being nice. He goes back to the role. But for a brief, exhilarating moment, he was something else. He was angry and honest and free. And the fact that this freedom was only possible within the context of an episode, that he had to return to his assigned role by the end credits, is itself a meta-commentary on the constraints that the show's format places on its characters. Darwin is trapped in a role. The show knows it. Darwin, on some level, knows it. And neither of them can fully escape it, because the role is what makes the show work. The loyal sidekick is essential to the story structure. Without Darwin's reliability, Gumball's chaos has no anchor. Without Darwin's goodness, the show's moral center collapses. Darwin's suppression isn't just personal, it's structural. He's good because the show needs him to be good, and the cost of that structural necessity is borne by Darwin alone. If that's not a psychologically profound commentary on the nature of roles and expectations, I don't know what is. Alright, let me move into some more specific episode analysis, because I think there are episodes that reveal facets of Darwin's psychology that deserve individual attention. The Flower, from season 3. This episode is about jealousy, specifically Darwin's reaction when Leslie the Flower starts spending time with Penny. Darwin has never experienced jealousy before, the episode implies. And when it arrives, it's overwhelming. The emotion is literally represented as a creature that grows inside him, taking over his body and mind. This is a perfect representation of what happens when a habitually positive person encounters a negative emotion for the first time. Darwin has spent his entire life cultivating happiness and suppressing negativity. So when jealousy finally breaks through, he has no framework for handling it. He can't process it, can't contain it, can't express it in a healthy way. The emotion takes over completely because Darwin has never developed the emotional regulation skills necessary to manage it. He's been too busy being nice. Emotional regulation is a developmental skill that children typically learn through experience, by feeling negative emotions in safe environments, having those emotions validated by caregivers, and gradually developing strategies for managing them. Darwin, whose survival strategy has been to suppress negative emotions entirely, has essentially skipped this developmental stage. His emotional regulation toolkit is missing the tools for handling jealousy, anger, frustration, and disappointment. So when these emotions arrive, and they always eventually arrive, they hit him with the force of something completely new and completely uncontrollable. The Burden from season 3 is another revealing episode. Darwin and Gumball are given the responsibility of looking after the school hamster, and Darwin becomes excessively attached to it. He's possessive, clingy, unable to share. The episode reveals that Darwin's attachment patterns aren't limited to his family. They extend to anything and anyone that he cares about. His attachment anxiety is generalized, applied to every relationship regardless of its nature. And here's the detail that a psychologist would zero in on. Darwin's possessiveness in The Burden mirrors the fear he expressed in The Origins, the terror of losing something he loves, the compulsion to hold on so tightly that he risks crushing the thing he's trying to protect. It's the same pattern, expressed in different contexts, because the underlying wound is the same. Darwin was flushed. Darwin was almost replaced. Darwin will never, ever let that happen again, even if his attempts to prevent it cause exactly the kind of problems he's trying to avoid. The Bet from season 5 reveals another interesting dimension. It's established that it took Darwin 5 years to learn facial expressions, and he still has trouble recognizing them. This is a small detail, but it's psychologically significant. Darwin is extraordinarily attuned to the emotional states of others. He's the family's emotional barometer, the first to notice when someone is upset. But he learned learned this skill late, and he learned it through deliberate study rather than natural intuition. This suggests that Darwin's emotional intelligence isn't innate, it's acquired. He's not a naturally empathetic person who reads emotions effortlessly. He's a person who taught himself empathy as a survival skill, painstakingly learning to decode facial expressions so he could anticipate and respond to others' emotional needs. This reframes his people-pleasing not as natural generosity, but as a learned strategy, a skill developed out of necessity, because reading the room correctly was the difference between belonging and being discarded. The Knight from Season 4 gives us a rare window into Darwin's subconscious. In this episode, various characters' dreams are shown, and Darwin's dream is notably warm and simple. He dreams about being with his family, about belonging, about safety. His subconscious desires are the most basic of all: to be included, to not be alone. While other characters dream about adventure, or power, or romance, Darwin dreams about the thing he's most afraid of losing. In dream analysis, which I should note is a more speculative branch of psychology, the content of recurring dreams often reflects our deepest anxiety. If Darwin's dream is about belonging, his nightmare is about being cast out. His psyche is organized around a single axis: inclusion versus exclusion, family versus isolation, belonging versus abandonment. Everything else, the morality, the positivity, the people-pleasing, is in service of this core concern. Let me now talk about something that I think elevates Darwin from interesting character to genuinely profound psychological portrait: his growth across the series. If the early seasons established Darwin's attachment patterns, codependency, and identity foreclosure, the later seasons show him, slowly, imperfectly, but genuinely, growing. And the growth looks exactly like what a psychologist would hope to see. In the early seasons, Darwin's goodness is rigid. He's good because he's afraid to be anything else. His morality is rule-based, his positivity is compulsive, and his emotional range is artificially restricted. But as the show progresses, Darwin becomes more flexible. He starts expressing disagreement. He starts setting boundaries. He starts acknowledging negative emotions without being consumed by them. His relationship with Carrie gives him a safe space to explore aspects of himself that don't fit the loyal sidekick mold. This is what psychologists call earned security, the process by which a person with insecure attachment develops, through positive relational experiences, a more secure attachment style. It doesn't erase the original wound. Darwin will always carry the scars of being flushed, of being a replacement, of watching his family prepare to move on without him. But those scars become less controlling over time. The anxious attachment softens. The people-pleasing becomes more selective. The identity becomes a little less reliant on others' approval and a little more grounded in genuine self-knowledge. And the show depicts this growth with remarkable subtlety. There's no single episode where Darwin has a breakthrough and becomes a different person. The change is gradual, almost imperceptible from episode to episode. But if you watch Season 1, Darwin, and Season 6 Darwin back to back, the difference is clear. Season 1, Darwin is a sidekick. Season 6, Darwin is a person. Not a fully individuated, psychologically whole person. He's still 10 years old. He's still working through his stuff. But a person with more depth, more range, more authentic selfhood than the cheerful goldfish we met at the beginning. That's realistic growth. That's what healing actually looks like. Not a dramatic transformation, but a slow, steady accumulation of small changes that eventually add up to something significant. I want to address one more dimension of Darwin's psychology before I start wrapping up, and it's one that I think connects everything we've discussed. It's about resilience. Darwin Watterson is, by any measure, one of the most resilient characters in animated television. He survived being flushed down a toilet. He crossed an ocean with no lungs and no legs. He watched his family prepare to replace him and found the strength to confront them rather than accept it. He navigates a world that wasn't designed for him, in a body that's fundamentally different from everyone else's, with a history that includes multiple abandonments and an identity that's been shaped by survival rather than choice. And he does all of this while maintaining his capacity for love, joy, connection, and genuine care for others. In psychology, resilience isn't defined as the absence of adversity. It's defined as the capacity to recover and grow in the face of adversity. And Darwin demonstrates this capacity in every episode. He's not resilient because he's happy all the time. He's resilient because he can be unhappy. He can experience loss, fear, anger, jealousy, and come back from it without losing his fundamental orientation toward connection and love. The source of Darwin's resilience, I believe, is the same attachment bond that causes him so much anxiety. His love for Gumball, for the Watterson family, for Carrie, for his friends. This love is both his vulnerability and his strength. It makes him afraid, but it also makes him brave. It makes him clingy, but it also makes him loyal. It makes him suppress his true feelings, but it also makes him capable of extraordinary acts of devotion and sacrifice. And that's that's the paradox that makes Darwin such a compelling psychological portrait. His greatest strength and his deepest wound are the same thing: love. The love that caused him to grow legs. The love that keeps him smiling when he's afraid. The love that makes him the best brother, the best friend, the best partner, and also the most anxious, the most codependent, the most self-suppressing. A psychologist would look at Darwin and see enormous potential. They'd see a person whose attachment patterns, while anxious, are fundamentally oriented toward connection rather than avoidance. They'd see someone who has developed survival strategies, people-pleasing, emotional suppression, identity foreclosure, that served him well in childhood, but may limit him in adulthood. They'd see someone who is beginning, slowly and tentatively, to develop a more authentic sense of self, supported by a loving family and a partner who values him for who he really is. And they'd probably say something like this: Darwin, you don't need to keep earning your place. You've already earned it. You earned it the moment you grew legs and crossed an ocean for the people you love. You don't need to be perfect or nice or always smiling. You just need to be you. The real you. The angry, jealous, scared, funny, brave, weird, wonderful, entirely unique you. Your family doesn't love the performance. They love the person underneath it. And if you let that person out, if you stop suppressing and start expressing, you might find that the love doesn't go away. It might even get stronger. That's what a psychologist would say about Darwin Watterson. And honestly, I think Darwin would listen. I think he'd nod. And I think slowly, over time, he'd start to believe it. Because that's what resilient people do. They grow. Not all at once, not perfectly, but persistently, stubbornly, with an optimism that isn't naive. It's earned. Earned through suffering, through loss, through the terrifying experience of being flushed away and choosing, against all odds, to swim back. Darwin Watterson is a goldfish who grew legs because he loved his brother, and he's been growing ever since. Growing legs, growing lungs, growing a personality, growing an identity, growing into the person he was always meant to be. Not the replacement fish, not the loyal sidekick, not the happy all the time people pleaser, but Darwin. Just Darwin, the one and only, irreplaceable. And isn't that what we all want to be told? That we're not replaceable? That we matter not because of what we do, but because of who we are? That the people who love us won't flush us away the moment we stop performing? Darwin's story is the story of every person who has ever been afraid of being abandoned. Every adopted kid who wondered if they were really wanted. Every people pleaser who forgot what their own feelings tasted like. Every person who transformed themselves to fit in and then couldn't remember what shape they started as. And the amazing thing, the genuinely, honestly, heartbreakingly amazing thing, is that the story is told through a cartoon goldfish on a show about a blue cat. A show that looks like chaos, but operates with precision. A show that treats its characters' inner lives with the same care and seriousness that the best therapy aspires to. Ben Bocquelet based Darwin on his childhood best friend, Paul, someone who Bocquelet has described as sweet-natured, bald, and who spent more time with Bocquelet's family than his own. There's something unbearably tender about that origin. Darwin is a love letter to a friend who found a second home. A friend who belonged not because biology demanded it, but because love did. If you have a Darwin in your life, someone who showed up one day and became family. Someone who is fundamentally different from you, but fundamentally yours. Tell them what the Wattersons sometimes forget to tell Darwin. Tell them that they're not a replacement. Tell them that their place in your life isn't conditional. Tell them that they don't have to perform to be loved. Tell them that their anger is valid. Their jealousy is understandable. Their fear of abandonment makes sense, given what they've been through. Tell them that they're not just tolerated, they're treasured. And if you are a Darwin, if you're the one who grew legs to get back to the people you love, if you're the one who is always smiling because you're afraid of what happens when you stop, then hear this: you matter. Not because of what you do for others, not because of how nice you are, or how useful you make yourself. You matter because you're you, the real you, the one underneath the performance. The one who gets jealous and angry and scared and confused. That person deserves to be seen and loved and kept, not flushed. Good night, everyone. Sleep well. And if you dream tonight, dream about growing legs. Not because you have to, but because you want to. Because the place you're going is worth the transformation. Because the people waiting for you will always be there. Because in the end, attachment isn't a weakness. It's the thing that makes us human, even if we're goldfish. Good night. I'll see you next time. Actually, hold on. I'm not done. I have too much left to say about this character. And I think if you've made it this far, you deserve the full picture. So let's go deeper. Let's really take Darwin apart and see what a psychologist would find inside. I want to go back to something I mentioned earlier and expand on it, because I think it's the key to understanding Darwin's entire psyche. I talked about Bowlby's attachment theory and how Darwin's early experiences map onto the anxious preoccupied attachment style. But I want to get more specific about what this looks like in practice across the series, because the show gives us so many examples that it almost reads like a clinical observation log. One of the hallmarks of anxious preoccupied attachment is something called hyperactivation of the attachment system. This means that the person's alarm bells are always going off. They're constantly scanning for signs of rejection. They interpret neutral behaviors as threatening. A friend doesn't text back immediately. They must be angry. A partner seems distracted. They must be losing interest. A family member has a bad day. It must be the anxious person's fault. Watch Darwin in any episode where Gumball is upset, and you'll see hyperactivation in real time. Darwin immediately assumes he's done something wrong. He jumps into problem-solving mode. He becomes excessively attentive, trying to fix the situation before it escalates into rejection. This isn't concern, it's surveillance. Darwin is monitoring Gumball's emotional state the way a child monitors a caregiver's mood, because shifts in mood are early warning signs of potential abandonment. In The Dream from season 2, Gumball is furious because he had a dream in which Darwin kissed Penny. Not a real event, a dream. And Darwin is devastated. Not because the accusation is unfair. He can't even process the fairness question. He's devastated because Gumball is angry with him. And Gumball being angry means the attachment bond is threatened. The content of the conflict is almost irrelevant. What matters is the emotional temperature. If Gumball is mad, Darwin's world is unstable. A psychologist would point out that Darwin's response to the dream is disproportionate to the trigger. Gumball's anger about a dream is objectively ridiculous. A securely attached person would say, "Dude, it was your dream, not my fault," and move on. But Darwin can't move on because the trigger isn't the dream, it's the anger. Any anger directed at Darwin, for any reason, activates the same primal circuit. I'm in danger. I'm being rejected. I'm about to be flushed. This pattern repeats across the entire series. The sidekick makes it explicit. Darwin is described as a moral guardian, but what he really is, in attachment terms, is a hyper-vigilant monitor of the relationship's health. He's not just Gumball's sidekick, he's Gumball's emotional security system, constantly checking the perimeter, constantly making sure the bond is intact. And here's where it gets clinically interesting. Hyperactivation of the attachment system is associated with a phenomenon called protest behaviors. When an anxiously attached person feels the bond slipping, they don't just get sad, they get loud. They become demanding. They escalate. They do things designed to provoke a response, because even a negative response is better than no response. Silence is the thing they can't tolerate. Silence means being forgotten. Silence means the void. Darwin's protest behaviors are scattered throughout the series, though they're usually played for comedy. In The Bros, his jealousy drives him to increasingly extreme actions, interrupting Gumball's dates, trying to sabotage the relationship, becoming possessive and controlling. These aren't rational responses. They're protest behaviors, desperate attempts to reestablish proximity to an attachment figure who seems to be pulling away. In The Burden, his possessiveness toward the class hamster is another form of protest. He's not really attached to the hamster. He's transferring his attachment anxiety onto a safe target, rehearsing the drama of holding on and letting go with a creature that can't actually leave him. It's displacement, in the Freudian sense, redirecting an emotion from its real target, Gumball the family, to a substitute target, the hamster, because the real target feels too dangerous to confront directly. Now let me talk about something that I think is genuinely underexplored in discussions of Darwin's character: his relationship with Nicole. Nicole Watterson is, in many ways, Darwin's most important attachment figure, more important arguably than Gumball. And I know that sounds like a hot take, but hear me out. Gumball is Darwin's brother. He's the person Darwin loves most visibly, most vocally, most consistently. But Nicole is Darwin's mother. She's the person who adopted him, who signed the papers. Figuratively, he's still technically registered as a pet, which is its own psychological horror, who gave him a place in the family. And for an adopted child, the relationship with the adoptive mother carries a specific kind of weight. Nicole represents security. She represents the decision to keep him. Every day that Nicole treats Darwin as her son, calls him part of the family, defends him, includes him, she reaffirms the adoption. She re-chooses him. And for a child whose foundational experience was being chosen, discarded, and chosen again, that daily re-choosing is essential. But Nicole is also complicated. She's stressed. She's overworked. She's juggling a chaotic family and a demanding job, and a husband who can barely function. She doesn't always have the bandwidth to give Darwin the reassurance he needs. And the show subtly but consistently, depicts Darwin's relationship with Nicole as slightly more distant than his relationships with the other family members. Darwin calls Nicole Mrs. Mom, not Mom, Mrs. Mom. It's a joke. It started because Richard told Darwin to call him Dad instead of Mr. Watterson, and Darwin split the difference with Mr. Dad, but it's also a linguistic marker of distance. The formality of Mrs. Mom suggests that Darwin hasn't fully claimed Nicole as his mother. He's acknowledging the role, she is his mom, while maintaining a thin but significant barrier of courtesy. It's as if he's saying, "You are my mother, and I am grateful, and I will never take that for granted," by being too casual about it. A family therapist would see this naming convention as a sign of what's called entitlement issues in adopted children. Not entitlement in the sense of demanding things, but entitlement in the sense of feeling entitled to be a full member of the family. Darwin doesn't feel fully entitled to call Nicole Mom without a qualifier. He doesn't feel entitled to be casual. He maintains the formality because, on some level, he doesn't believe he has the right to take the relationship for granted. This is heartbreaking, and it's made more heartbreaking by the fact that Nicole genuinely loves Darwin. In the roots, she's devastated by the possibility of him being unhappy. In the origins, she officially adopts him with open arms. She's not withholding anything. The barrier exists entirely in Darwin's perception. It's a product of his attachment history, not her behavior. But that's exactly how attachment patterns work. They're internal models of the world, and they persist even when external reality contradicts them. Let me also talk about Darwin's relationship with Richard, because it reveals something important about how Darwin relates to different types of attachment figure. Richard is, by any clinical standard, an inadequate parent. He's lazy, irresponsible, incapable of basic adult function. He killed multiple goldfish through negligence before Darwin arrived. He's the reason Darwin was flushed, if not directly, then through the chain of events set in motion by his incompetence. And yet Darwin doesn't seem to hold any of this against him. In fact, Darwin treats Richard more like a friend than a father. They goof off together. They share snacks. They play video games. There's a peer quality to their relationship that's absent from Darwin's more deferential relationships with Nicole and even Gumball. And this makes psychological sense if you consider Darwin's attachment framework. Richard is, paradoxically, the safest person in Darwin's world. Not because he's competent, he's the opposite of competent, but because he's consistent. Richard is always the same. He's always goofy, always lazy, always well-meaning, always failing in exactly the same ways. There's no variability in Richard's behavior, which means there's no uncertainty, which means there's no anxiety. Darwin doesn't need to monitor Richard's mood or anticipate his reactions, because Richard's reactions are entirely predictable. He'll eat something, he'll say something dumb, he'll hug everyone. That's it. For an anxiously attached person, predictability is gold. It's not the quality of the caregiving that matters most, it's the consistency. A caregiver who is consistently mediocre is less anxiety-provoking than a caregiver who is usually excellent, but occasionally unavailable. Darwin's nervous system can relax around Richard because Richard will never surprise him. There are no shoes to drop. This is why Darwin's relationship with Richard is the most relaxed of all his relationships. It's the one where he's least performative, least anxious, least on. He can just be a kid around Richard because Richard is basically a kid himself. Now let me talk about Aeneas, because her relationship with Darwin reveals yet another facet of his psychology. Aeneas is the youngest Watterson, a genius rabbit who is smarter than every other member of her family combined. She's also, in many ways, the most perceptive member of the family when it comes to Darwin's emotional life. It's Aeneas who, in the roots, is the first to consider whether they might be misinterpreting Darwin's sadness. It's Aeneas who, in multiple episodes, serves as the voice of reason when the family's well-intentioned efforts go awry. Darwin and Aeneas have a warm but sometimes complicated sibling relationship. There's a gentle rivalry. As adopted siblings, they're both competing for position within the family, though neither would put it in those terms. And there's a dynamic that therapists would recognize. Aeneas's intellectual superiority sometimes threatens Darwin's role as the good sibling. If Aeneas is the smart one and Darwin is the good one, what happens when Aeneas is also good? Or when Darwin wants to also be smart? In The Password from Season 2, Darwin and Gumball compete to be Richard's favorite child. The competition is played for comedy, but underneath the jokes, there's a genuine anxiety, particularly for Darwin, about where he ranks in the family hierarchy. An adopted child competing with biological children for parental affirmation is treading on some of the most sensitive ground in family psychology. The biological children might not think about it, but the adopted child almost certainly does. If push comes to shove, would the parents choose their real kids over me? The show never addresses this directly, which is actually more realistic than addressing it would be. In most adoptive families, this anxiety is the elephant in the room. Everyone knows it exists. Nobody talks about it, because talking about it would mean acknowledging that the family is, on some fundamental level, constructed rather than given. And that acknowledgement threatens the narrative of unconditional belonging that everyone has invested in. Darwin's position in the family is secure in practice, but insecure in his own perception. And that gap between external reality and internal experience is the central tension of his entire psychological life. Let me shift now to discussing Darwin's moral psychology in more depth, because I think there's something really important here that I only touched on earlier. I mentioned Kohlberg's stages of moral development and placed Darwin primarily at the conventional level. But I want to complicate that assessment, because Darwin's morality is actually more interesting than any single stage can capture. At his best, Darwin shows flashes of post-conventional moral reasoning. In The Safety, yes, he becomes authoritarian, but the impulse comes from a genuine, principled concern for others' well-being. He's not enforcing rules for their own sake. He's enforcing rules because he believes, sincerely, that people are in danger and that protecting them is more important than respecting their autonomy. This is a classic moral dilemma, the tension between care and freedom. And the fact that Darwin comes down on the side of care, even to a fault, tells you something about his moral foundations. In The Best, from season 5, Darwin becomes a social justice activist. He stands up for marginalized perspectives. He calls out privilege. He takes moral positions that are genuinely admirable in principle, even when the execution becomes absurd. What's interesting is that Darwin's activism isn't performative in the way that, say, Alan's niceness is occasionally revealed to be. Darwin actually believes in the causes he champions. He's not doing it for approval. He's doing it because he genuinely cares about fairness and justice. This puts Darwin in an interesting psychological position. His people-pleasing and his moral conviction are in constant tension. People-pleasing says, agree with everyone and avoid conflict. Moral conviction says, stand up for what's right, even if it makes people uncomfortable. Most of the time, people-pleasing wins. Darwin goes along with Gumball's schemes even when he knows they're wrong, because maintaining the relationship is more important than maintaining his principles. But occasionally, moral conviction wins. Darwin draws a line, refuses to participate, and accepts the temporary discomfort of disagreement for the sake of his values. A developmental psychologist would say that this tension is actually a sign of growth. The fact that Darwin sometimes chooses his principles over his attachment needs means that his morality is becoming genuinely internalized, rather than purely relational. He's not just following rules to maintain approval. He's developing an internal compass that occasionally points him in a direction the group doesn't want to go. And crucially, the show doesn't punish him for this. When Darwin stands up for his beliefs, the narrative usually validates him. Maybe not immediately, but by the episode's end. The show is saying it's okay to be the moral compass. It's okay to disagree. It's okay to prioritize your values over your desire to be liked. This is exactly the kind of message that an anxiously attached people pleaser needs to hear, and the show delivers it consistently across its run. Let me do something fun here and construct what a hypothetical therapy intake assessment might look like for Darwin Watterson. Obviously, this is speculative and somewhat playful, but I think it's a useful exercise for consolidating everything we've discussed. Patient: Darwin Raglan Caspian Ahab, Poseidon Nicodemus, Watterson III, age 10, species goldfish, modified. Presenting concern: patient displays chronic people-pleasing behavior, difficulty expressing negative emotion, hypervigilance regarding relationship stability and identity diffusion. Patient's self-concept is almost entirely relational, with minimal autonomous identity development. History: patient was purchased as a pet fish and is the 8th replacement in a series of identical fish, all of whom died. Patient was accidentally flushed down a toilet at approximately age 2, resulting in forced separation from his primary attachment figure. During the separation, patient underwent dramatic physical transformation, developing legs, lungs, and the capacity for speech. Patient attributes this transformation to the strength of his love for his adoptive brother. Patient was subsequently adopted into the family and has been a full member for approximately 8 years. Patient remains legally classified as a pet. Current relationships: patient is in a committed romantic relationship with a ghost named Carrie, which appears to be a generally healthy corrective experience. Patient's primary attachment relationship remains with his adoptive brother Gumball, which shows elements of codependency. Patient maintains a warm but slightly formal relationship with his adoptive mother, Nicole, calling her Mrs. Mom rather than mom. Patient's relationship with his adoptive father Richard is relaxed and peer-like. Assessment. Patient presents with anxious, preoccupied attachment style, consistent with early experience of separation, loss, and conditional belonging. Patient has developed people-pleasing and emotional suppression as primary coping strategies. Patient shows signs of identity foreclosure, having committed to a good identity without adequate exploration of alternatives. Patient demonstrates significant resilience and capacity for growth, supported by a loving, if chaotic, family system and a healthy romantic relationship. Recommendations: individual therapy, focusing on attachment repair, identity exploration, and emotional regulation skills. Family therapy to address the family's tendency to take patients' emotional labor for granted. Support in developing autonomous interests and identity markers independent of relational roles. Ongoing monitoring of people-pleasing patterns with gentle encouragement toward authentic self-expression. Prognosis: good, provided patient receives consistent support and the family system continues to evolve. Patient's fundamental orientation toward connection, combined with his demonstrated resilience and capacity for growth, suggests a positive long-term trajectory. I love doing that because it makes you realize just how much psychological texture this character has. You could actually write that assessment. You could actually conduct that intake. And the information would be consistent and coherent because the show has built Darwin with the kind of depth and consistency that allows for clinical analysis. That's remarkable for any fictional character. For a cartoon goldfish, it's extraordinary. Now let me talk about something a bit different. The way the show uses Darwin's psychology to explore broader themes about nature versus nurture, free will versus determinism, and the question of what makes a person. Darwin is, in the most literal sense, a creature who became a person. He started as a pet fish, an object, a commodity, something to be owned and eventually replaced. Through love, willpower, and mysterious biological forces, he transformed into a walking, talking member of society. He grew legs, he grew lungs, he grew a personality. The nature versus nurture question applies to Darwin more literally than it applies to almost any other fictional character. His nature is fish, his nurture is Watterson, and the show consistently argues that nurture wins, that Darwin is a Watterson because he was raised as a Watterson, loved as a Watterson, and chose to be a Watterson. His biology, the fish body, the goldfish brain, the instincts of an aquatic creature, is secondary to his relational identity. This is psychologically progressive and also psychologically accurate. The field of adoption psychology has largely moved away from emphasizing biological origins and toward emphasizing the quality of the adoptive environment. What matters most for an adopted child's development isn't where they came from, it's where they are now. The relationship with the adoptive family, the quality of the attachment bond, the sense of belonging and security. These are the factors that predict outcomes, not genetics, not species, not the circumstances of acquisition. Darwin's story is the show's most powerful statement of this principle. He's a fish. He was bought from a van. His predecessors all died. None of that matters. What matters is that Gumball gave him his shoes, that Nicole adopted him officially, that Richard calls him son, that Aeneas considers him her brother, that the family, chaotic and dysfunctional as they are, chose him and continues to choose him every day. And yet, and this is where the show gets really interesting, Darwin's biology doesn't disappear just because his nurture is strong. He's still a fish. He still breathes underwater. He still sleeps in a fishbowl in some episodes. He still has moments where his fish nature surfaces in unexpected ways. The show doesn't argue that nurture erases nature. It argues that nurture transcends nature. Darwin is a Watterson and a fish. Both are true. Neither negates the other. This is the mature, nuanced position on the nature-nurture question, and it's the position that contemporary psychology generally endorses. We are shaped by both our biology and our environment. The question isn't which one matters, they both matter. The question is how they interact, how they influence each other, how they combine to create the unique, irreducible complexity of a single individual life. Darwin is a unique, irreducible complexity. He is fish-shaped and Watterson-hearted. He is biologically an aquatic creature and psychologically a family member. He is nature and nurture in constant creative tension, and the show treats both sides of this tension with respect, never suggesting that Darwin should choose one identity over the other. I keep thinking about the shoes, Gumball's shoes, the green and white sneakers that Darwin wears in every single episode after The Origin. Gumball gave them to him when Darwin first grew legs, the first thing Darwin ever wore, the first physical artifact of his new terrestrial life, given to him by the person he loves most. Darwin never takes them off. off, never changes them, never upgrades to a different pair. He wears those specific shoes for the entire run of the series. And while the show never explicitly addresses this, I think it's one of the most psychologically resonant details in Darwin's characterization. Those shoes are what psychologists call a transitional object, an item that carries the emotional weight of an attachment relationship. Think of a child's blanket or stuffed animal. The object isn't important for its physical properties. It's important because it represents the bond with the caregiver. It's a portable piece of security that the child can carry with them into situations where the caregiver isn't present. Darwin's shoes are his transitional object. They're a tangible, wearable reminder that Gumball chose him, that in the moment when Darwin was cold and barefoot and vulnerable, Gumball literally gave him the shoes off his own feet. The shoes represent the adoption. They represent belonging. They represent the moment when Darwin stopped being a pet fish and became a brother. And Darwin never takes them off because that would mean setting down the proof. And he can't do that, not because the proof isn't real, it is, but because his anxious attachment needs the constant, physical, tangible reassurance that the bond exists. The shoes aren't just shoes, they're evidence. Evidence that he was wanted, evidence that he belongs. I'm going to tell you something honest. This character makes me emotional in a way that I don't fully understand. And I think it's because Darwin represents something universal, the desire to be chosen, not inherited, not obligated, not defaulted into, but actively, deliberately chosen by the people you love. And the fear, the deep, primal, never fully rational fear that the choosing might stop. That one day you might wake up and the shoes won't fit anymore. Everyone has a version of this fear, not just adopted people, not just people with attachment issues, everyone. Because every relationship is, at some level, an ongoing choice. And every choice carries the possibility of being unchosen. Darwin's genius, and I use that word deliberately, is that he makes this universal fear visible through a character who is so specific, so particular, so ridiculous, and wonderful and orange that you don't realize you're looking in a mirror until it's too late. Now, I really am going to wrap up. For real this time, I promise. If a psychologist sat down and watched all 240 episodes of The Amazing World of Gumball, paying close attention to Darwin Watterson, here's what I think they'd conclude. They'd say that Darwin is a remarkably well-drawn portrait of anxious, preoccupied attachment in an adopted child. They'd say that his people-pleasing, his emotional suppression, his identity foreclosure, his codependency with Gumball, his fear of abandonment, and his compensatory moral rigidity are all clinically recognizable patterns that emerge from early experiences of separation, loss, and conditional belonging. They'd say that his growth across the series, from reflexive people-pleasing toward more authentic self-expression, from identity foreclosure toward tentative identity exploration, from rigid morality toward principled flexibility, is a realistic and encouraging depiction of what healing looks like for anxiously attached individuals. They'd say that his relationship with Carrie represents a positive corrective experience that challenges his attachment patterns without triggering his defensive behavior. They'd say that his relationship with Gumball is deeply bonded, but shows elements of codependency that would benefit from gentle clinical attention. They'd say that his naming convention, Mrs. Mom and Mr. Dad, reflects unresolved feelings about his entitlement to full family membership. They'd say that his shoes are a transitional object. They'd say that his resilience is genuine and his prognosis is good. And then they'd say something that I think is the most important thing of all. They'd say that Darwin Watterson is loved, genuinely, consistently, unconditionally loved by his family. And that love, imperfect, sometimes clumsy, sometimes insufficient, but always present, is the foundation on which his entire recovery is built. Love doesn't fix everything. Attachment wounds don't disappear because someone hugs you. Identity issues don't resolve because your family tells you that you belong. The work is harder than that, messier than that, longer than that. But love is where the work begins. Love is what makes the work possible. And Darwin has love in abundance. He has a brother who will always find him at the mall. He has a mother who will always readopt him. He has a father who will always be there, unreliable, stupid, and full of unconditional warmth. He has a sister who will always see through the performance to the real person underneath. He has a girlfriend who will always value authenticity over pleasantness. And he has an audience, us, lying in bed at 2 a.m, listening to a video essay about a cartoon goldfish who sees him, really sees him. Not the sidekick, not the moral compass, not the happy all the time people pleaser. Him, Darwin, The kid who grew legs because he was afraid to be alone. The kid who smiles because he's afraid to cry. The kid who is, underneath all the performance and all the fear and all the love, just a person trying to figure out who he is. That's what a psychologist would say about Darwin Watterson, and that's what I say too. Good night, everyone. Sleep well. And remember, you don't have to grow legs to be loved, but if you already have, and they're tired from all that running, it's okay to stop. It's okay to rest. The people who love you aren't going anywhere. Sweet dream. I'll see you next time. Okay, I keep doing this, saying I'm done and then coming back. But I'm lying here thinking about Darwin, and there's genuinely more to say. So if you're still with me, let's keep going. This part is for the night owls, the ones who can't sleep because they're too busy thinking about cartoon characters. I see you. You're my people. I want to explore something that I haven't addressed yet, and it's something that I think a developmental psychologist would find absolutely fascinating. It's Darwin's relationship with aggression. Aggression is one of the most fundamental aspects of human psychology. Every person has aggressive impulses. The desire to fight, to assert, to push back, to destroy. In healthy development, children learn to channel aggression constructively through sports, through competition, through assertiveness, through creative expression. They learn that aggression isn't inherently bad. It's a natural energy that needs direction, not suppression. Darwin doesn't get this lesson. His early experience teaches him the opposite. Aggression is dangerous because aggression could lead to conflict, and conflict could lead to rejection, and rejection could lead to being flushed. So Darwin suppresses his aggressive impulses. He swallows them. He converts them into something else, something socially acceptable, something safe. He converts aggression into compliance. But suppressed aggression doesn't disappear. It accumulates, and the show depicts this accumulation with startling accuracy. In the painting from season 1, there's a telling moment where Darwin tries to release stress by yelling. He screams with such force that the visual suggests a nuclear explosion, and through it all, he's still smiling. His face is locked in a pleasant expression, while his body channels energy that could literally destroy things. This is the perfect visual metaphor for Darwin's psychological state. Massive internal pressure, masked by a pleasant exterior. The smile isn't hiding happiness, it's containing an explosion. By season 2, the containment is showing cracks. The banana features one of Darwin's most aggressive episodes. Banana Joe damages Darwin's homework, and Darwin's response is wildly disproportionate. He vandalizes Banana Joe's locker, writes threatening messages, and attempts to physically fight him. The aggression has been building for so long that when it finally finds an outlet, it's uncontrolled and excessive. Darwin goes from 0 to 100 because he has no intermediate setting. He's either suppressing completely or exploding completely. There's no middle ground. The words makes this explicit. When Darwin starts speaking honestly, his honesty is actually suppressed aggression finding a verbal outlet. He's not just being truthful, he's being cruel. He's saying the things he's wanted to say for years, and they come out barbed and vicious because they've been marinating in suppression for so long. The episode frames this as Darwin learning to be honest, but what he's actually doing is learning to express anger, and the initial expression is messy, destructive, and hurtful, because that's what happens when you let a pressure valve release all at once. Psychologists who work with children who have experienced attachment disruption would recognize this pattern immediately. These children often present as extremely well-behaved, compliant, pleasant, eager to please, until something triggers an aggressive outburst that seems to come from nowhere. Teachers and parents are shocked. He's always been such a good kid, but the goodness wasn't genuine equilibrium. It was suppression, and the outburst isn't an aberration. It's the real feelings breaking through the dam. The show never pathologizes Darwin's aggression. It treats his outbursts as problems to be solved, but not as evidence that something is fundamentally wrong with him. And this is the right approach. Darwin's aggression isn't pathological. It's natural. It's the inevitable result of being a person with needs and frustrations and limits who has been taught that expressing those things will cost him everything. What Darwin needs isn't less aggression. He needs more, in smaller, more controlled, more frequent doses. He needs to learn that he can be angry without being destructive, that he can disagree without being abandoned, that he can push back without losing his place. And the show, across its 6 seasons, gradually teaches him these things. Not perfectly, not completely, but gradually. And that gradual learning is, in a word, growth. I want to zoom out now and talk about Darwin within the broader context of children's television, because I think his character serves an important function that deserves recognition. Children's television has a long history of nice characters, the kind, helpful, morally upright figures who serve as models of pro-social behavior. Think of characters like SpongeBob, Steven Universe, or Going further back, characters like Mr. Rogers himself. These characters are designed to teach children the value of kindness, empathy, and cooperation. But there's a tension inherent in the nice character archetype. If the character is always nice, always kind, always morally perfect, they become flat. They become aspirational, but not relatable. Real children aren't always nice. They get angry, they feel jealous, they have ugly thoughts. And if the only model of goodness that television offers is a character who never experiences these things, children may internalize the message that their darker feelings are shameful, that being a good person means never feeling bad things. Darwin avoids this trap, and he avoids it brilliantly. He's presented as the nice one, the moral compass, the character who represents kindness and positivity. But the show repeatedly demonstrates that his niceness has costs. It shows the suppression that enables it. It shows the explosions that result from it. It shows that being the nice one isn't a natural state. It's an exhausting performance that requires constant effort and carries significant psychological risk. By depicting Darwin's niceness as complex rather than simple, the show gives children a more realistic model of pro-social behavior. It says, yes, be kind. Yes, be empathetic, but also be honest. Also be angry when anger is warranted. Also take care of your own needs, even when that means temporarily disappointing someone else. Goodness isn't the same as compliance. Kindness isn't the same as self-erasure. This is genuinely important psychological messaging for children, and I think Gumball delivers it more effectively than almost any other animated series. Darwin isn't a moral lesson, he's a moral complexity, and children learn more from complexity than from simplicity, because complexity mirrors their actual experience of the world. Let me also discuss something that psychology calls the false self, a concept developed by the pediatrician and psychoanalyst D.W. Winnicott. Winnicott proposed that when a child's authentic emotional expressions are consistently rejected or ignored by their caregivers, the child develops a false self, a compliant, socially acceptable persona that hides the true self underneath. The false self exists to protect the true self from rejection. It's a mask, a performance, a survival strategy. Darwin's entire persona is, to a significant degree, a false self. The relentless optimism, the compulsive helpfulness, the suppressed anger, the identity defined entirely through relationships. These are the hallmarks of Winnicott's false self. Darwin has constructed a version of himself that he believes the world wants, and he presents that version to everyone, all the time, because the alternative, presenting his true self, with its anger and jealousy and selfishness and fear, feels too dangerous. But here's the thing about the false self. It's exhausting to maintain. Living as a performance is draining because every moment requires effort. You can never relax. You can never be off duty. You're always monitoring, always adjusting, always checking whether the mask is still in place. And this exhaustion manifests in the periodic breakdowns that we see throughout the series, the moments when Darwin's composure cracks and the real feelings pour out. Winnicott also proposed that the therapeutic goal isn't to destroy the false self. It's useful after all. And social life does require some degree of persona management. The goal is to create space for the true self to exist alongside the false self, to let the real person peek out occasionally, in safe contexts, with trusted people, and to discover that the world doesn't end when the mask comes off. This is exactly what happens in Darwin's relationship with Carrie. She's the safe space where the mask can slip. She doesn't need him to be happy all the time. She doesn't punish his authenticity. She creates room for the true Darwin to exist. And the true Darwin, the one who gets jealous, who has opinions, who is sometimes grumpy, who is always more complicated than he appears, is, it turns out, someone worth knowing. I want to take another tangent and discuss the way Darwin's psychology intersects with the show's meta-narrative, because this is something I find endlessly rich. As I discussed in my previous cartoon video about why Gumball gets better every season, the show develops a meta-narrative about the characters being fictional, existing within a television show, subject to the rules and constraints of television storytelling. The characters gradually become aware of their fictional nature, and this awareness has profound implications for their psychology. For Darwin specifically, the meta-awareness adds a devastating extra layer to his identity issues. If Darwin is a character in a show, then his role, loyal sidekick, moral compass, cheerful friend, isn't just a social expectation. It's a narrative constraint. He's nice because the show needs him to be nice. He's supportive because the story requires a supportive deuteragonist. His identity isn't just shaped by his attachment history and his family dynamics. It's literally written by people who decided, before he was born, what he would be. Think about what that means for Darwin's true self. If his false self is the performance he puts on for his family, his true self is the person underneath the performance. performance. But if the performance is also the character, as written by the show's creators, then the true self doesn't just exist beneath the persona, it exists beneath the text itself. Darwin's true self is, in a sense, the version of him that the show can never fully depict, because depicting it would require breaking the narrative role that defines his function in the story. This is the most existentially vertiginous aspect of Darwin's character, and I think it's what makes him genuinely profound, rather than just well-written. He's trapped, not just by his attachment patterns, not just by his family dynamics, but by the medium itself. He can never fully become his true self, because his true self exists outside the boundaries of the show. He's a fictional character, longing for an authenticity that fiction, by its nature, can't provide. And yet, and this is the beautiful paradox, in that longing, in that striving towards something he can never fully reach, Darwin becomes more real, more human, more psychologically alive than characters who are free to be whoever they want. His constraint is what makes him complex. His limitation is what makes him profound. The fact that he can never fully escape his role is what makes his moments of genuine self-expression so precious and so moving. I think this is why Darwin resonates with so many viewers on a level they can't quite articulate. Everyone knows what it's like to be trapped in a role. Everyone knows what it's like to perform a version of themselves that doesn't quite capture who they really are. Everyone has a gap between their false self and their true self. And everyone has moments when the true self peeks through and the world gets a little brighter. Darwin's moments of true selfhood, his anger, his jealousy, his stubborn insistence on his own moral convictions, his quiet contentment in Carrie's company, these are the moments when the character transcends his role and becomes something more than what was written. And we recognize those moments, even if we can't name what we're recognizing, because they mirror our own quiet, daily struggle to be real. Let me talk now about a few more specific episodes that I think are essential to understanding Darwin's psychology, because I want to make sure I've covered the ground thoroughly. The Sidekick from season 1 is one of the first episodes to directly address Darwin's role in the duo. The episode explores the idea that Darwin is just a sidekick, that his function is to support Gumball's adventures, not to have adventures of his own. Darwin's response to this label is complicated. He doesn't reject it outright. He doesn't have the confidence for that yet, especially in season 1. But there's a flicker of something underneath the acceptance, a recognition that being defined as someone else's supporting character is both comfortable and limiting. A psychologist would note that Darwin's acceptance of the sidekick label is consistent with his attachment pattern. Anxiously attached people often accept subordinate roles in relationships because the alternative, asserting equality and potentially creating conflict, feels too risky. Being the sidekick is safe. The sidekick is needed. The sidekick is never the one who gets abandoned, because the sidekick is defined by their attachment to the main character. You can't flush the sidekick without losing part of the main character too. But the label also constrains. It tells Darwin that his story is secondary, that his needs are less important, that his function is to serve, not to lead. And over the course of the series, you can see Darwin quietly, slowly, imperceptibly pushing against this constraint. He starts making decisions for himself. He starts disagreeing with Gumball. He starts, in small ways, insisting on his own narrative. The triangle from season 5 is an interesting complement to the sidekick. In this episode, Gumball becomes jealous when Darwin discovers a hidden musical talent. Darwin can sing beautifully, naturally, effortlessly, and Gumball, who is used to being the more talented and charismatic of the two, can't handle it. He becomes insecure and competitive. What's psychologically interesting here is Darwin's response to Gumball's jealousy. He doesn't enjoy it. He doesn't feel vindicated. He feels guilty. He feels like having a talent that his brother doesn't have is a betrayal of their dynamic, as if being good at something independent of Gumball is a form of disloyalty. This is textbook codependency. In a codependent relationship, personal achievement can feel threatening because it disrupts the established dynamic. If Darwin is good at singing and Gumball isn't, that means Darwin has something that's his own, something independent of the relationship. And independence, for an anxiously attached person, is scary. Independence means you could survive without the other person. And if you could survive without them, maybe they'll think they can survive without you. The triangle doesn't resolve this tension neatly. Gumball comes to terms with Darwin's talent, but the underlying dynamic, Darwin's discomfort with having something of his own, is left lingering. And that's realistic. These patterns don't resolve in 11 minutes. They simmer. The The Hug from season 4 is a small episode that reveals something big about Darwin's physical boundaries, or rather, his lack of them. The episode involves an extended, awkward hug between Gumball and another character, and Darwin's discomfort is played for comedy. But underneath the comedy, there's a question about physical boundaries that's relevant to Darwin's psychology. Darwin doesn't seem to have strong physical boundaries. He's comfortable with physical affection, often excessively so. He hugs freely, sits close, doesn't seem to have the same sense of personal space that other characters do. This could be read as simple friendliness, but it could also be read as another manifestation of his attachment anxiety. Anxiously attached people often use physical proximity as a reassurance mechanism. If I can touch you, if I can feel your body next to mine, then I know you're still here. You haven't left. Darwin's constant physical closeness to Gumball, they share a bedroom, they walk together, they sit together, isn't just brotherly companionship. It's an ongoing proximity-seeking behavior that serves to regulate Darwin's attachment anxiety. If he can always see Gumball, always hear him, always be within arm's reach, then the separation anxiety stays manageable. The moment they're apart, the moment Darwin can't verify Gumball's presence, the anxiety spikes. The BFFs from the Revival series apparently explores this dynamic further, examining what happens when something threatens the Gumball-Darwin bond. The Revival series, The Wonderfully Weird World of Gumball, continues to develop Darwin's character in interesting ways. Bacalé and his team have discussed introducing more Carrie and Darwin content, more exploration of secondary characters, and more complex storylines. For Darwin specifically, the 7-year gap between the original series and the revival creates an interesting psychological situation. The show was absent for 7 years, and the in-universe explanation is that the characters were literally dormant. Darwin has essentially experienced another form of stasis, another period of non-existence, and how that affects his already present fears about the void and oblivion is fertile ground for character exploration. I want to spend a few minutes talking about Darwin and the concept of emotional labor, because I think this is another lens through which his psychology becomes clearer and more poignant. Emotional labor is the process of managing one's own emotions in order to meet the emotional demands of a role or relationship. The term was originally coined by sociologist Arlie Hochschild to describe the work that service industry employees do, smiling at customers, remaining pleasant in the face of rudeness, projecting emotions they don't feel. But the concept has since been applied more broadly to any situation where a person's emotional expression is governed by external expectations rather than internal experience. Darwin performs more emotional labor than any other character in the show. He manages his own emotions constantly, suppressing anger, amplifying happiness, projecting calm when he feels anxious. He manages Gumball's emotions, serving as a sounding board, a cheerleader, a therapist, a moral guide. He manages the family's emotions, mediating conflicts, diffusing tensions, absorbing the negative feelings that nobody else wants to deal with. And he does all of this while being 10 years old. He's a child doing the emotional work of a family therapist, and nobody acknowledges it. Nobody thanks him for it. Nobody asks if he's okay. They just assume that Darwin is fine, because Darwin always seems fine, because that's his job, to seem fine. The concept of emotional labor is closely related to what psychologists call parentification, a family dynamic in which a child takes on adult emotional responsibilities, becoming a caretaker for their own caregivers. Parentified children manage their parents' moods, mediate their parents' conflicts, and suppress their own needs in order to maintain family stability. They learn to be emotionally attuned, nurturing, and self-sacrificing, and these skills serve them well in the short term, but cause significant psychological damage in the long term. Darwin shows signs of parentification, particularly in his relationship with Nicole. When Nicole is stressed or upset, Darwin, like the other children, often works to regulate her emotions, either by being extra well-behaved, by trying to fix whatever's bothering her, or by simply making himself invisible so as not to add to her burden. This isn't unique to Darwin. All the Watterson children do it to some degree, because Nicole's emotional volatility makes the household feel unsafe when she's distressed. But Darwin does it more than the others, more automatically, more thoroughly, because his attachment anxiety makes him more attuned to emotional shifts and more motivated to manage them. The long-term cost of parentification is significant. Parentified children often grow up to be adults who can't identify their own emotional needs, who define their self-worth through service to others, who feel guilty when they prioritize themselves, and who have difficulty in relationships because they're always the caretaker and never the one being taken care of. This is Darwin's trajectory if his growth stalls, if he doesn't continue to develop the authentic self-expression that has been slowly emerging across the series. He's at risk of becoming a chronic emotional laborer, the person who is always fine, always helpful, always smiling, and never ever asks for anything. But I don't think that's where Darwin ends up. And here's why. The show gives Darwin something that many people pleasers never receive: a mirror. Gumball holds up a mirror to Darwin's patterns, sometimes accidentally, sometimes deliberately, that allows Darwin to see himself clearly. In the words, Gumball pushes Darwin to express his real feelings. In the bros, the conflict itself forces Darwin to confront his possessiveness. In the triangle, Gumball's jealousy shows Darwin that talent doesn't have to be hidden. These aren't therapeutic interventions in the clinical sense, but they function similarly. They challenge Darwin's automatic patterns and create space for alternatives. And Carrie holds up a different kind of mirror, one that reflects not Darwin's dysfunction, but his potential. In Carrie's company, Darwin sees a version of himself that is relaxed, authentic, and accepted without performance. She doesn't need him to be the sidekick, or the moral compass, or the happy fish. She needs him to be present. And that simplicity, the radical simplicity, of being accepted for who you are right now, without improvement needed, is the most healing experience that any anxiously attached person can have. The psychological term for this is unconditional positive regard, a concept from Carl Rogers' humanistic psychology that describes the attitude of a therapist who accepts and values the client without judgment or condition. Rogers believed that unconditional positive regard is the foundation of all healing because it allows the client to explore their true self without fear of rejection. Carrie offers Darwin unconditional positive regard, not in a therapeutic context. She's his girlfriend, not his therapist, but in the relational context that matters most. She regards Darwin positively. She does so unconditionally. And in the space that her regard creates, Darwin can begin, slowly, tentatively, imperfectly, to drop the mask and be himself. That's hope. That's not just good storytelling. That's a psychologically accurate depiction of how people heal. And the fact that it's happening to a cartoon goldfish doesn't make it any less real. If anything, it makes it more accessible, more universal, because the metaphor of the fish who grew legs is so absurd and so specific that it bypasses our defenses and goes straight to the emotional truth underneath. I'm going to close with one final observation, and then I really will be done. Darwin's full name is Darwin Raglan Caspian Ahab Poseidon Nicodemus Watterson III. That's a lot of name for a little goldfish, and every part of it is interesting. Darwin, of course, references Charles Darwin, the evolutionary biologist who theorized that species change and adapt over time in response to environmental pressure. Darwin the goldfish literally evolved in response to environmental pressure. The pressure of being separated from his attachment figure. His very name is a description of his origin story. Raglan, Caspian, Ahab, Poseidon, Nicodemus, these are grandiose, literary, mythological names. They suggest someone important, someone with a grand destiny. They're the names of kings and gods and sea captains, and they're attached to a goldfish who sleeps in a bowl. The dissonance between the grandeur of the name and the smallness of the creature is comedic, but it's also meaningful. Darwin contains multitudes. He carries within him the potential for greatness, for heroism, for adventure, for transcendence, even if his daily life is confined to a small house in a small town on a small show. And Watterson III, he's the third, or the 8th, or the 10th, depending on how you count. He's a successor, an inheritor, a continuation, but also, crucially, the last one, the one who stuck, the one who grew legs and came back and refused to be replaced. The one who, out of all the Darwins, became irreplaceable. That's his name. Darwin Raglan, Caspian Ahab, Poseidon Nicodemus, Watterson III, a goldfish named after evolution, a replacement who became irreplaceable, a pet who became a person, a character who became, through the patient, loving, sometimes clumsy accumulation of 6 seasons of storytelling, one of the most psychologically complete and emotionally resonant characters in animated television. If a psychologist looked at Darwin Watterson, they'd see attachment wounds and defense mechanisms and identity issues and codependency patterns and suppressed aggression and emotional labor and all the diagnostic categories and clinical frameworks that we've discussed tonight. But if they looked long enough, if they really sat with the character, the way we've been sitting with him tonight, I think they'd also see something else, something that transcends the clinical categories, something that's harder to name but impossible to miss. They'd see a person who is trying his best. Not perfectly, not always successfully, but with genuine, earnest, relentless determination. A person who was dealt a difficult hand, abandoned, flushed, replaced, adopted into a family that doesn't always know how to love him in the ways he needs, and who has responded to that difficulty not with bitterness or withdrawal, but with an almost stubborn insistence on love, on connection, on belonging, on the radical belief that the world, despite everything it's done to him, is fundamentally good. And maybe that's the most important thing a psychologist would say about Darwin Watterson. Not that he's anxiously attached, or codependent, or identity diffused, but that he chose love over and over and over again, in the face of every reason not to. He chose love. And that choice, that refusal to stop loving even when loving is painful and scary and exhausting, is the bravest thing any person, real or fictional, can do. Good night, everyone. For real this time. Sleep well. And if you love a Darwin, if you love someone who gives and gives and gives and forgets to take, maybe tomorrow you could let them take. Just a little. Just enough to remind them that love goes both ways. Sweet dream. I'll see you in Elmore. You know what? There's one more thing I need to talk about. I've been lying here thinking, and I realized I haven't properly addressed something that I think a psychologist would consider central to Darwin's case: his relationship with gratitude. Darwin is, by all accounts, an extraordinarily grateful person. The show makes this explicit. In The Flower and The Night, he's shown as someone who doesn't want much and is genuinely happy with what he has. He expresses gratitude for his family, his life, his place in Elmore. He's thankful in a way that goes beyond politeness. It's a core feature of his personality. And here's where the psychology gets complicated, because gratitude in adopted children is a loaded concept. In adoption psychology, there's a well-documented phenomenon called gratitude pressure, the implicit or explicit expectation that adopted children should be grateful for being adopted, that they should appreciate being chosen, that they should recognize how much better their life is now compared to whatever would have come before. And while adoptive parents rarely intend this as a burden, the effect on the child can be profound. Gratitude pressure tells the adopted child that they owe something, that their place in the family is a gift that must be repaid through good behavior, compliance, and, yes, gratitude. It transforms the parent-child relationship from one of unconditional love into one of debt. And the child, carrying this debt, can never fully relax into the relationship because they're always working to repay something that can never be fully repaid. Darwin's gratitude looks, on the surface, like a beautiful character trait. And in many ways, it is. Genuine gratitude is associated with well-being, resilience, and positive relationships. But the excess of Darwin's gratitude, its compulsive quality, its refusal to coexist with complaint or dissatisfaction, this suggests something closer to gratitude pressure than to authentic appreciation. Darwin is grateful because he believes he should be grateful. He had nothing. He was a pet fish in a bowl. And now he has a family, a home, a brother, a life. How can he complain? How can he be unhappy? How can he express anything other than gratitude when the alternative was being flushed down a toilet and replaced? This is the trap. Gratitude becomes a cage when it's used to suppress legitimate negative feelings. If you can never complain because you should be grateful, then your real experiences, the parts of family life that are genuinely difficult, the moments when adoption is painful, the feelings of not quite belonging, get buried under an obligation to appreciate. And buried feelings don't die, they fester. The show touches on this in The Roots in a way that's genuinely clever. At the end of the episode, after the whole misunderstanding about Darwin's fish roots is resolved, Darwin tries to guilt-trip Nicole into buying him a bigger fish tank by lamenting that he never knew his real parents. And Nicole guilt-trips him right back by listing everything the family has done for him, adopting him, raising him, caring for him. It's played as a funny family dynamic, mutual guilt-tripping as a form of affection. But the underlying exchange is revealing. Darwin invokes his origins as a bargaining chip. Nicole invokes the adoption as a counter-bargaining chip. Both are using Darwin's history as leverage, and both are, in their own way, acknowledging that the adoption creates an imbalance that neither of them quite knows how to navigate. A family therapist would see this exchange as a sign that the family needs to have a more honest conversation about what adoption means for Darwin, not as a one-time event, we adopted you, the end, but as an ongoing reality that shapes Darwin's experience in ways the biological Wattersons may not fully understand. Darwin's origins aren't just backstory. They're a living part of his psychology that affects how he relates to every member of the family every day. And pretending that adoption is settled, that it happened once and doesn't need to be revisited, is a disservice to Darwin's emotional needs. I also want to talk about Darwin's relationship with his own emotions in more detail, because I think this is where the psychological portrait becomes most vivid. Darwin has what psychologists call alexithymia-like features, difficulty identifying and describing his own emotional states. This isn't full alexithymia, which is a clinical condition characterized by a fundamental inability to process emotions. It's more like emotional illiteracy that results from chronic suppression. Darwin has been suppressing his negative emotions for so long that he's lost touch with what those emotions actually feel like. In The Bet, it's revealed that it took Darwin 5 years to learn facial expressions, and he still has trouble recognizing them. This detail, which the show drops casually, almost as a throwaway gag, is psychologically enormous. If Darwin had to learn facial expressions through deliberate study rather than natural development, it means his early emotional education was disrupted. Something prevented him from developing the normal, intuitive capacity for emotional recognition that most children acquire through interaction with caregivers. That something is almost certainly his unusual developmental trajectory. Darwin spent his earliest life as a fish, a creature that communicates through entirely different channels than mammals. He didn't learn facial expressions because he didn't have a face, in the mammalian sense. He didn't learn emotional tone because fish don't vocalize in the way that land animals do. When he grew legs and joined the Watterson family, he had to learn an entirely new emotional language from scratch. The language of facial expressions, body language, vocal tone, and social cues that mammals acquire automatically through their first years of life. This is another way in which Darwin's experience parallels that of children adopted across cultures. A child adopted from one cultural context into another may need to learn new emotional vocabularies. Different cultures express and interpret emotions differently, and what reads as happy in one culture might read as reserved in another. The child has to become bilingual, in a sense, fluent in the emotional language of their birth culture and the emotional language of their adoptive culture. And that bilingualism requires deliberate effort that children raised in a single cultural context never have to make. Darwin's emotional bilingualism, his need to translate between fish world emotion and mammal world emotion, is another layer of the constant adaptation that characterizes his life. He's not just performing a pleasant persona, he's performing in a language he had to learn, using a face he wasn't born with, expressing emotions through a body that wasn't designed for emotional expression. That's exhausting, that's heroic, and that's almost entirely invisible to the people around him, because the performance is so polished by this point that it looks effortless. I want to discuss one more psychological concept that I think is crucial to understanding Darwin, and it's a concept that comes from trauma psychology rather than attachment theory. It's called post-traumatic growth. Post-traumatic growth is the phenomenon of positive psychological change that can occur as a result of struggling with highly challenging circumstances. It's not the absence of trauma. The trauma is still there, still painful, still impactful. It's the development of new strengths, new perspectives, and new capacities that emerge from the process of working through that trauma. Researchers have identified 5 domains of post-traumatic growth: appreciation of life, new possibilities, personal strength, relating to others, and spiritual or existential change. And Darwin demonstrates growth in every single one of these domains. Appreciation of life. Darwin's gratitude, while complicated by adoption dynamics, also reflects a genuine capacity to appreciate the life he has. He knows what it's like to have nothing. He knows what it's like to be flushed away. And that knowledge gives him a baseline comparison that makes even the mundane aspects of family life feel precious. New possibilities. Darwin's entire existence represents new possibilities. He was a fish. Now he walks, talks, attends school, has friends, has a girlfriend. Every aspect of his life is a possibility that didn't exist before his transformation. And he continues to discover new possibilities as the series progresses. New talents, new relationships, new aspects of himself. Personal strength, Darwin's resilience, his capacity to endure hardship and bounce back, his willingness to confront difficult situations. These are strengths that were forged in the crucible of his early experiences. He's not strong despite his trauma. He's strong because of the process of working through it. Relating to others, Darwin's relationships are the richest part of his life, and they're made richer by his understanding of what it means to lose connection. Because he knows what separation feels like. He values connection more intensely. Because he's experienced loneliness, he reaches out to lonely people. His empathy isn't abstract, it's experiential. Existential change. Darwin's very existence challenges the boundaries of what's possible. He's a fish who became a person. He's a pet who became a brother. He's a product who became irreplaceable. His life is a constant refutation of limitation, a living argument that transformation is possible, even under the most unlikely circumstances. Post-traumatic growth doesn't mean the trauma was worth it. It doesn't mean that being flushed was okay, or that the Wattersons' treatment of their pet fish was acceptable, or that Darwin should be grateful for his suffering. It means that Darwin, through his own strength and the support of his relationships, has managed to turn adversity into something generative. He's not just surviving his history, he's growing from it. And that growth, visible, measurable, accumulating across 6 seasons of television, is what makes Darwin's psychological portrait ultimately hopeful rather than tragic. He has real problems, real wounds, real patterns that could, if left unaddressed, calcify into lifelong dysfunction. But he also has real resources, a loving family, a supportive partner, genuine moral convictions, and an almost supernatural capacity for love. The raw materials for healing are all there. The work is ongoing, and the direction is positive. I want to close, truly close this time, with a reflection on what Darwin Watterson means for the representation of psychological complexity in children's media. For a long time, children's television treated psychology as something simple. Characters were happy or sad, good or bad, brave or scared. Emotions were discrete, nameable, and resolvable within a single episode. The idea that a character could be simultaneously happy and anxious, simultaneously generous and codependent, simultaneously grateful and resentful, that kind of complexity was considered too sophisticated for young audiences. Gumball rejects this assumption entirely. Darwin Watterson is not a simple character. He's a multi-layered psychological portrait that would hold up under clinical analysis. He's a character whose behavior patterns, emotional responses, and relational dynamics are consistent, coherent, and grounded in recognizable psychological theory. Not because the writers were deliberately applying clinical frameworks, but because they were writing honestly about a character whose circumstances naturally produce the patterns that clinical frameworks describe. And the fact that this character is in a children's show, that millions of children are watching Darwin and, on some level, recognizing themselves in his fears and his patterns and his quiet, desperate love, is incredibly valuable. Because those children might not have the words for what they're feeling. They might not know what attachment anxiety means, or what people-pleasing looks like, or why they can't stop trying to make everyone happy even when it's destroying them. But they can look at Darwin, this ridiculous, beautiful orange goldfish with green shoes, and they can say, that's me, I do that, I feel that. And just being seen, just having your experience reflected back to you through a fictional character can be the beginning of understanding, the beginning of growth, the beginning of healing. Ben Bocquelet based Darwin on his childhood best friend, Paul. He said that Paul was sweet-natured and bald, and spent more time at the Bocquelet household than his own. I don't know Paul's story. I don't know why he spent so much time at someone else's house, but I know that Bocquelet created a character in his memory who captures something real and painful and beautiful about the experience of belonging to a family that isn't yours by birth, but is yours by choice. That character has touched millions of people, and tonight, through the lens of psychology, we've tried to understand why. Darwin Watterson is a goldfish who grew legs, a pet who became a person, a sidekick who contains multitudes, a happy fish who is quietly, desperately afraid of being flushed, and one of the most psychologically rich, emotionally honest, and genuinely therapeutic characters ever to appear on a screen, big or small. If a psychologist could talk to Darwin, I think they'd start with a simple question. The same question that every good therapist starts with. Not, what's wrong with you? Not, what are your symptoms? Not, how can we fix you? Just, how are you, Darwin? And I mean really, not the performance, not the smile. How are you? And I think Darwin, after a long pause, the longest pause he's ever taken. Because pausing means not performing, and not performing means being visible, and being visible means being vulnerable. I think he'd say, I'm scared. I'm scared all the time. I'm scared that one day I'll wake up and the shoes won't fit, and the family won't need me, and I'll be back in the bowl, or back in the ocean, or back in the void, and everything I love will just go on without me. And I know that's not rational. I know they love me. I know they chose me. But the fear doesn't listen to what I know. The fear just swims, and the psychologist would nod. And they'd say, that fear makes sense, given what you've been through, and it's okay to feel it. You don't have to smile through it. You don't have to pretend it's not there. You can just let it swim, and we'll be here when it comes back. And maybe, for the the first time, Darwin would take a breath, a real breath, not the cheerful inhale that precedes the next smile. A deep, slow, honest breath. The kind of breath that says, I'm here, I'm real, I'm not performing right now, I'm just breathing. And that breath, that single, quiet, unperformed breath, would be worth more than all the legs in the world. Good night, everyone. Sleep well, breathe deeply, and know that wherever you are, whatever you've been through, whatever role you've been assigned, you are more than the performance. You are more than the smile. You are more than enough, and you don't have to grow legs to prove it. See you next time. One more thing. I swear this is the last time, but I was thinking about something that keeps nagging at me, and I think it might be the most important observation I've made all night. I've been talking about Darwin through the lens of pathology, attachment disorders, codependency, identity issues, suppressed aggression, and all of that is real and supported by the text of the show. But I want to push back against my own framing for a moment, because I think there's a danger in reducing a character to their psychological diagnosis, a danger in seeing the wound and missing the person. Darwin Watterson is not just his attachment patterns. He's not just his defense mechanisms. He's not just a case study. He's a person, a fictional person, sure, but a person with qualities that transcend any clinical category. He's funny, genuinely, effortlessly funny. His comedic timing, his physical gags, his ability to say exactly the wrong thing at exactly the right moment. These aren't symptoms, they're talents. Darwin is one of the funniest characters on the show, and his humor isn't the nervous laughter of an anxious person trying to keep things light. It's the real, joyful humor of someone who finds the world amusing and wants to share that amusement with others. He's brave, not just in the attachment sense, not just I crossed an ocean to get back to my brother. Brave. Darwin is brave in the small, everyday ways that matter most. He stands up to bullies. He defends friends who can't defend themselves. He faces situations that terrify him. Halloween, for instance, which he has a genuine phobia of, because the people he loves need him there. His bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's the choice to act despite fear, and that's the bravest kind. He's creative. His musical talent, his ability to play ukulele, his artistic attempts. Darwin has a creative soul that often gets lost in discussions of his psychology. There's an artist in there, underneath the anxiety and the people-pleasing. Someone who sees the world in unique ways and wants to express that vision. The creative impulse is one of the most authentically Darwin things about him. It exists independently of his relationships, independently of his trauma, independently of his role as sidekick or moral compass. It's just his. He's morally courageous. This is different from just being good or nice. Moral courage is the willingness to stand up for what you believe is right, even when it's unpopular, even when it costs you something. Darwin demonstrates moral courage repeatedly across the series, refusing to participate in schemes he finds unethical, calling out behavior he finds wrong, standing firm on principles even when everyone around him is going along with the crowd. This isn't people-pleasing. It's the opposite of people-pleasing. It's the moments when Darwin's values win the battle against his anxiety, and those moments are among his finest. And he's loving. I've talked about his love as a function of his attachment patterns, and that's one valid lens. But let's also just acknowledge love for what it is, one of the most fundamental and valuable human capacities. Darwin loves deeply, broadly, generously. He loves his brother. He loves his family. He loves Carrie. He loves his friend. He loves Larry, who everyone takes for granted. He loves the world, even though the world hasn't always been kind to him. That capacity for love isn't a symptom. It's a gift. A good psychologist wouldn't just see the pathology. They'd also see the strengths. They'd use a framework called strengths-based assessment, an approach that identifies not just what's wrong with a client, but what's right. What resources do they have? What capacities have they developed? What qualities can be built upon? Darwin's strengths-based assessment would look something like this. Strengths: exceptional capacity for empathy and emotional attunement. Strong moral compass with developing capacity for autonomous moral reasoning. Demonstrated resilience across multiple adverse experiences. High social intelligence, including multilingual capabilities. Creative talents in music and the arts. Capacity for deep, committed relationships, humor and playfulness that serve as genuine coping resources, not just defensive mechanisms, physical adaptability and determination, strong connection to a supportive family system, healthy romantic relationship that promotes authentic self-expression. When you list Darwin's strengths like that, the picture changes. He's not just a bundle of anxious patterns and suppressed emotions. He's a person with real gifts, real capabilities, real potential. And those gifts aren't separate from his struggles. They're intertwined with them. His empathy comes partly from his attunement, which comes partly from his hypervigilance, which comes partly from his attachment anxiety. The strengths and the wounds are woven from the same thread. You can't remove one without unraveling the other. And isn't that true true of all of us. Our greatest strengths and our deepest wounds are usually the same thing, seen from different angles. The person who cares too much is also the person who loves deeply. The person who can't stop performing is also the person who's incredibly attuned to others' needs. The person who's afraid of abandonment is also the person who values connection more than anything in the world. Darwin teaches us this, if we're paying attention. He teaches us that psychology isn't just about finding what's broken and fixing it. It's about understanding the whole person, the wounds and the gifts, the fears and the courage, the performance and the truth underneath, and honoring all of it. Let me talk about one final psychological concept that I think brings everything together: self-compassion. Self-compassion, as defined by psychologist Kristen Neff, has three components: self-kindness, treating yourself with the same warmth you'd offer a friend; common humanity, recognizing that suffering and imperfection are shared human experiences; and mindfulness, observing your own emotions without over-identifying with them. Darwin is extraordinarily compassionate toward others, but often lacks self-compassion. He treats himself more harshly than he treats anyone else. When he makes a mistake, he's devastated. When he has a negative feeling, he treats it as evidence that something is wrong with him. When he fails to live up to his own standards of niceness and goodness, the guilt is crushing. A psychologist working with Darwin would probably focus a significant portion of their work on developing self-compassion, teaching Darwin to be as kind to himself as he is to others, teaching him that having bad days, ugly feelings, and imperfect relationships doesn't make him a bad person. It makes him human, or in his case, a humanized goldfish. But the principle is the same. Self-compassion is the antidote to the performance. When you can be compassionate toward your own imperfection, you no longer need to hide them. You no longer need to smile when you're sad. You no longer need to pretend that everything is fine. You can sit with your feelings, really sit with them, without trying to fix them or suppress them or perform over them, and discover that they're survivable, that the feelings don't destroy the relationships, that the people who love you can handle your imperfection, that you don't have to earn your place every single day. Darwin is on his way to this discovery. He's not there yet. He may never fully get there, because self-compassion, like all psychological growth, is a lifelong project, not a destination. But he's moving in the right direction. And the show, through its patient and honest depiction of his journey, is saying something to its audience that I think is worth hearing. It's okay to be a work in progress. It's okay to have patterns you don't understand. It's okay to love too much and fear too deeply and smile when you want to cry. It's okay to be complicated, because complexity isn't a problem to be solved. It's a gift to be unwrapped, slowly, carefully, with kindness. That's what a psychologist would say about Darwin Watterson. He's a complex, resilient, anxiously attached, beautifully flawed, deeply loving, occasionally explosive, chronically performing, gradually healing, endlessly fascinating character who happens to be an orange goldfish in green shoes. And he's going to be okay. Not because his problems are small, they're not. Not because his solutions are simple, they're not. But because he has love, he has family, he has Carrie. He has Gumball's shoes on his feet, and a heart that literally grew inside him out of the sheer force of wanting to belong. And in the end, that's enough. It has to be enough, because for Darwin, love has always been enough. It grew him legs. It carried him across an ocean. It earned him a place in a family that was never supposed to be his. And it will carry him forward through whatever comes next, because that's what love does. It carries you, even when your legs are tired, even when the water is deep, even when the void is closing in and the world is glitching and everything you love seems like it could be taken away at any moment. Love carries. Darwin knows this better than anyone. And if you ever doubt it, if you ever feel like you're swimming against a current that's too strong, if you ever feel like you're performing a version of yourself that doesn't quite fit, if you ever wonder whether the people who love you would still love you if they saw the real you, think of a little orange goldfish who grew legs because he refused to be separated from the person he loved. Think of Darwin, and then grow your own legs and walk toward the people who matter and let them see you, really see you, not the performance, you, because that's what Darwin is learning to do. And if a goldfish can do it, so can you. Good night, everyone. Sleep well. I'll see you next time on Cortoon. And Darwin, if you're listening, you're doing great, buddy. You're doing great. Okay, one genuinely final bonus section. I know I keep doing this, but I promise, after this, we're done. I realized that I've spent this entire video talking about Darwin's internal psychology without spending enough time on something that I think a clinical psychologist would consider equally important: the family system. Because here's the thing about psychology. Individual pathology doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists within a system, and the system both creates and maintains the patterns that the individual displays. The Watterson family is, from a systems therapy perspective, a fascinating organism. It has clear roles, clear hierarchies, clear dynamics, that serve specific function. Nicole is the over-functioning partner, the one who carries the cognitive and emotional load for the entire family. Richard is the under-functioning partner, the one who, whether through inability or unconscious choice, abdicates adult responsibility and forces Nicole to compensate. Gumball is the identified patient, the family member whose behavior is most visibly problematic, the one who gets blamed for the family's dysfunction. Aeneas is the hero child, the one who achieves, who excels, who maintains the family's sense of competence through her individual accomplishments. And Darwin? Darwin is what family therapists call the peacemaker, or the mascot. He's the family member whose role is to maintain harmony, to smooth over conflicts, to inject positivity into tense situations. The mascot keeps the family functional by absorbing emotional tension and converting it into something more manageable: humor, helpfulness, cheerfulness. Without the mascot, the family's underlying conflicts would surface more frequently and more destructively. This role is essential to the family's functioning. The Wattersons need Darwin's emotional labor. They need someone to be the mediator, the moral compass, the person who notices when things are getting too heated and intervenes before the situation explodes. And Darwin fills this role beautifully. So beautifully that nobody notices the cost. But the cost is real. The mascot pays for the family's harmony with their own authenticity. They sacrifice their real feelings: anger, sadness, frustration, desire, for the sake of the group. They become a function rather than a person. And the family, unconsciously, colludes in this arrangement, because the alternative, a Darwin who has bad days, who makes demands, who takes up space with his own needs, would disrupt the equilibrium that everyone depends on. This is the systemic dimension of Darwin's psychology that I think is crucial, and that the show handles with surprising sophistication. The show doesn't portray the Wattersons as intentionally exploiting Darwin. They love him. They genuinely, sincerely love him. But love in a dysfunctional family system doesn't prevent exploitation. It can actually enable it, because Darwin loves them back, and because his love is expressed through service and sacrifice. The family has no reason to question the arrangement. Everyone is getting what they need. Everyone is comfortable. The system works, except for Darwin. The system works for everyone, except the person holding it together. A family therapist would want to intervene at the systemic level. They wouldn't just work with Darwin on his individual attachment pattern. They'd work with the entire family on recognizing and redistributing the emotional labor. They'd help Nicole develop healthier stress management so she doesn't need Darwin as a buffer. They'd help Richard take on more emotional responsibility so Darwin doesn't have to fill the gap. They'd help Gumball recognize when he's taking Darwin's support for granted and develop reciprocity in their relationship. They'd help Aeneas notice when she's dismissing Darwin's contributions because they're emotional rather than intellectual. And they'd help Darwin gently, gradually, safely, to start setting boundaries, to say, I'm not okay when he's not okay, to take a day off from being the family mascot and let someone else hold the harmony for once, to discover that the family won't fall apart if he stops holding it together for one afternoon, that his place in the family isn't contingent on his function in the family. This is the work, not just Darwin's work, the family's work, because attachment patterns and family roles aren't created by individuals alone. They're co-created by systems, and they can only be changed at the system level. The show gives us glimpses of this systemic change across its run. In The Hero, Richard's hurt feelings prompt the family to recognize how much they take him for granted. In The Parents, the family attempts to address Nicole's estrangement from her own parents. In The Origins, the family officially adopts Darwin, transforming his legal status from pet to person. These are systemic interventions, moments when the family's dynamics shift, however briefly, towards something more equitable and more honest. But the show also acknowledges that systemic change is hard, it's slow, it's incomplete. The family keeps falling back into old patterns because old patterns are comfortable, because change requires energy that this exhausted, overstretched, underfunded family doesn't always have. And that's realistic. Family systems don't transform overnight. They evolve across generations. I find it genuinely moving that the show takes the long view. It doesn't promise quick fixes. It doesn't present a single episode where the family has a breakthrough and everything is different. Instead, it shows the slow, incremental, sometimes frustrating process of a family gradually becoming more aware of its own dynamics. And Darwin, patient, resilient, still smiling, still growing, is right there in the middle of it, doing his part while slowly, quietly, learning to ask the family to do theirs. Let me make one more clinical observation before I really truly conclude, I want to talk about what psychologists call secure base distortion and how it applies to Darwin. In attachment theory, the attachment figure serves as a secure base, a stable, reliable presence from which the child can explore the world and to which they can return when they feel threatened. A healthy, secure base allows the child to develop confidence, autonomy, and a robust sense of self because they know that no matter how far they venture, the base will be there when they come back. Secure base distortion occurs when the attachment figure is unreliable, inconsistent, or absent, causing the child to develop a distorted relationship with exploration and autonomy. Instead of using the base as a launching pad for confident exploration, the child either clings to the base, refusing to explore because leaving feels too dangerous, or avoids the base, exploring compulsively because the base doesn't feel safe enough to return to. Darwin's secure base distortion manifests as clinging. He stays close. He maintains proximity. He checks in constantly. He resists separation. And when he does explore, when he does venture into independence, whether through his musical talent in The Triangle, or his romantic relationship with Carrie, or his moral stands in The Safety, there's always a thread pulling him back toward the base. A gravitational force reminding him that exploration is risky and the base might not be there when he returns. This is why Darwin's moments of independence are so psychologically significant. Each time he steps away from the base, each time he asserts an opinion that Gumball doesn't share, or pursues an interest that isn't about the family, or stands his ground when everyone wants him to back down, he's challenging his secure base distortion. He's testing the hypothesis: if I explore, will the base still be there? And each time the answer is yes. Each time Gumball is still there. The family is still there. The shoes still fit. The distortion weakens a little. The base becomes a little more trusted. The exploration becomes a little more confident. Over 6 seasons, these small tests accumulate into something approaching genuine autonomy. Season 6 Darwin is meaningfully more independent than Season 1 Darwin. He disagrees more often. He asserts himself more readily. He has his own relationship, his own moral convictions, his own moments of genuine self-expression. He's still anxiously attached. That doesn't change in 6 seasons of a children's show, but the attachment is less rigid, less totalizing, less all-consuming than it was at the beginning. And that's what growth looks like, clinically speaking. Not the elimination of the pattern, but its gradual loosening. Not the erasure of the wound, but the slow development of the capacity to live with it. Not the transformation of an anxious person into a secure person, but the cultivation of earned security, a hard-won, fragile, precious kind of safety that comes not from never having been hurt, but from having been hurt and survived and discovered against all evidence and all expectation that the people you love are still there. Darwin is earning his security, episode by episode, season by season, one small act of independence at a time, one moment of authentic self-expression at a time, one breath at a time. And that, more than the attachment theory, more than the developmental frameworks, more than the clinical terminology, is what a psychologist would ultimately say about Darwin Watterson. They'd say he's healing, slowly, imperfectly, in the way that real people heal. Not all at once, not permanently, not without setbacks, but persistently, stubbornly, with the same determination that once grew him legs. He grew legs to survive. Now he's growing a self to live. And that, in the end, is the most amazing world of all. Good night for the last time. I mean it. Sleep well, everyone. I love making these for you, and I'll see you in Elmore. Post-credits thought, because every good cartoon video has one. I've been thinking about something that Bacalé said about the writing process for Gumball. He and his team described their approach as digging into their most shameful and problematic childhood experiences and turning them into comedy. And I've been wondering, whose experience is Darwin based on? Bacalé has said Darwin was inspired by his childhood friend Paul, someone sweet-natured, who spent more time at the Bacalé household than his own. But I think Darwin also represents something more universal than any single inspiration. I think Darwin represents the experience of the child who finds family outside their biological family. The child who shows up at a friend's house and stays for dinner, then stays for the weekend, then just kind of stays. Not because their home life is terrible, though sometimes it is, but because this other family, this chosen family, feels more like home than home does. And that child, the Paul, the Darwin, is always carrying a specific kind of awareness. An awareness of their guest status. An awareness that they're here by invitation, not by right. That the family's kindness is a gift that could be revoked. That the dinner table has a specific number of chairs, and one of them was pulled up from the other room for you. That awareness never fully goes away. Even after you've been officially adopted, officially welcomed, officially told that you belong, the awareness lingers. It lives in the nervous system. It shows up in the way you always offer to do the dishes, the way you never take the last piece of food, the way you say thank you a little too often, the way you call her Mrs. Mom instead of just Mom. It shows up in green shoes that you never take off. Every kid who's ever been the Darwin in someone else's family knows exactly what I'm talking about. The simultaneous warmth and terror of being loved by people who didn't have to love you. The gratitude that's real, but also a little bit protective. A way of saying, I know this is a gift. I know you could take it back. Please don't take it back. The smile that's genuine, but also a little bit strategic. A way of saying, see, I'm easy to have around. I don't take up too much space. You won't regret letting me stay. And the shoes. Always the shoes. Whatever the equivalent of the shoes is in your life. The gift that someone gave you that you hold on to long after it's worn out. Because it's not really about the shoes. It's about the moment someone looked at your bare feet and thought, I should do something about that. The moment someone chose you. Darwin Watterson is a goldfish in a family of cats and rabbits. He sleeps in their house. He eats at their table. He wears their son's shoes. And every single day, in 100 small ways that nobody notices and everybody depends on, he earns his place by being the kindest, most helpful, most positive person in the room. Not because he's simple, not because he's naive, not because he doesn't know any better, because he remembers the toilet, he remembers the ocean, he remembers watching his family shop for a new fish, and he never, ever wants to go back there again. That's the psychology of Darwin Watterson. Not a diagnosis, not a label, just a person. A brave, scared, loving, complicated person, doing the best he can with what he was given. And honestly, what more can any of us do? Good night, sleep tight, don't let the void get you. And Darwin, wherever you are, thank you for growing the legs, for coming back, for staying. We're glad you stayed. Actually, and I swear on everything I hold dear, that this is the very last thing. I want to leave you with a list. Not a formal list with numbers and headers. We don't do that on Cartoon. Just a stream of things that I think a psychologist would notice about Darwin that we haven't fully explored tonight. Because this character is so rich that even 25,000 words isn't enough. They'd notice that Darwin never initiates conflict, but is devastatingly effective when dragged into one. In The Banana, when he finally fights back, the result is disproportionate and shocking. His suppressed aggression, when released, is more intense than anyone expects, including Darwin himself. This is the volcano model of emotional expression. Years of quiet pressure, followed by sudden, explosive eruption. A psychologist would work with Darwin on creating smaller, more frequent release valves so the pressure never reaches critical mass. They'd notice that Darwin has a complex relationship with physical affection. He craves it. He's tactile. He hugs readily. He gravitates toward physical proximity with the people he loves. But there are also moments where physical boundaries confuse him, where he's not sure what's appropriate, where his eagerness to connect overrides his awareness of others' comfort levels. This is consistent with a child who didn't learn physical boundaries naturally through early caregiving. He had to piece together the rules of touch from observation rather than experience, and he doesn't always get it right. They'd notice that Darwin has an interesting relationship with authority. He generally respects authority figures, teachers, parents, rules, but his respect is conditional on the authority being exercised justly. When authority becomes unjust, when Miss Simeon is cruel, when Principal Brown is unfair, Darwin is willing to resist. This suggests that his moral development is more advanced than his social development. He knows what's right even when he can't always act on that knowledge. The gap between his moral reasoning and his behavioral patterns is itself a sign of growth. He's developing principles that will eventually, with time and support, translate into more consistent, authentic action. They'd notice that Darwin processes stress somatically. When he's overwhelmed, his body reacts, screaming, shaking, freezing. His emotional experiences are deeply embodied, which makes sense for a creature who literally transformed his body in response to emotional need. For Darwin, the body isn't separate from the mind. Emotions don't just happen in his head. They happen in his fins, his legs, his lungs that shouldn't exist. A somatic therapy approach, working with the body to release stored emotional tension, might be particularly effective for Darwin, given how central his body has been to his psychological story. They'd notice that Darwin's humor serves multiple functions simultaneously. It connects him to others. He's funnier when he has an audience, when his jokes are landing, when the laughter is shared. It diffuses tension. He uses humor to redirect conversations away from uncomfortable territory. It expresses truth indirectly. Some of his funniest lines are also his most honest, slipping genuine observations past his own censorship system disguised as jokes. And it regulates his own emotions, laughing prevents crying, and Darwin knows this instinctively. A psychologist wouldn't try to take Darwin's humor away. They'd try to help him recognize when humor is serving connection and when it's serving avoidance, so he can choose consciously rather than automatically. They'd notice that Darwin has an unusual capacity for forgiveness. He forgives Gumball for taking him for granted. He forgives the family for accidentally flushing him. He forgives classmates who've been cruel to him. His forgiveness is generous and, for the most part, genuine. But a psychologist might gently probe whether some of that forgiveness is premature, whether Darwin sometimes forgives before he's fully processed the hurt, because holding on to anger feels too threatening to the relationship. Premature forgiveness can prevent genuine healing because it short-circuits the grief process. Sometimes you need to be angry before you can forgive. And Darwin doesn't always give himself permission to be angry first. They'd notice that Darwin's emotional vocabulary is smaller than his intelligence would suggest. He can identify basic emotion: happy, sad, scared, angry, but he struggles with the nuances, the difference between frustration and rage, the difference between disappointment and grief, the difference between loneliness and boredom. These subtle emotional distinctions are the building blocks of emotional intelligence, and developing them would help Darwin navigate his inner world with more precision and less overwhelm. Right now, every negative emotion registers as the same thing, as bad, and that lack of differentiation makes every negative experience feel equally threatening. They'd notice that Darwin's gratitude, while excessive in some contexts, is also genuine, and that's important. The clinical instinct might be to label all of Darwin's positivity as defensive or compensatory, but that would be reductive. Some of Darwin's happiness is real. Some of his gratitude is authentic. Some of his love for the world is exactly what it appears to be: a sincere, uncomplicated appreciation for the miracle of being alive. A good psychologist would honor the genuine alongside the defensive, helping Darwin distinguish between the positivity that comes from joy and the positivity that comes from fear, so he can keep the joy and release the fear. And finally, truly, absolutely, no more encores finally, they'd notice that Darwin is a character who was created with love, not just written with skill or designed with intelligence, but created with love, by a man who based him on a childhood friend, by voice actors who gave him warmth and depth across multiple casting, by animators who made his little orange body move with grace and personality, by a production team that invested 6 seasons of care into making him feel real. And that love, the creator's love for the character, shines through in every episode. It's the reason Darwin feels so alive. It's the reason his psychology is so coherent. It's the reason his struggles resonate and his growth inspired. Because underneath all the analysis and all the terminology and all the clinical frameworks, there's a simple truth. Someone cared enough to make this character real. And that caring, that commitment to honesty and depth and emotional truth is what makes the psychology work, not the frameworks, the caring. A psychologist would say that Darwin Watterson needs love, boundaries, self-compassion, emotional literacy, and the gradual, supported development of an autonomous identity, and they'd be right. But they'd also say, if they were a good psychologist, if they were the kind who sees the whole person and not just the diagnosis, they'd also say that Darwin Watterson already has the most important thing. He has people who will be there when the shoes wear out and when the legs get tired, and when the smile finally, mercifully, drops. He has a family, a real one, not because biology demands it, but because love does. And in the end, that's all any of us need. Good night, Elmore. Good night, Darwin. Good night, everyone. Sleep well, grow legs, and come back. We'll be here.